That was fast.
The January 24th, 2022 regular Wasilla City Council meeting is called to order. The time is 6 p.m. Before we begin, Council, please put away cell phones. If you have personal business to attend to during the meeting, please move for a recess. If you are participating telephonically, please mute your phone unless speaking. Also, when speaking, please state your name for those streaming the meeting. Madam Clerk, please call the roll.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Councilmember Sullivan Leonard.
Here.
Councilmember Graham.
Here.
Councilmember Johnson.
Here.
Councilmember Brown.
Here.
Councilmember Vlock.
Here.
Councilmember Harvey.
Here.
You do have a quorum, Madam Mayor. We have Councilmembers Sullivan Leonard and Brown participating telephonically. Councilmembers Graham, Johnson, Vlock, and Harvey are here in the council chambers.
Please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance, and James, will you lead us?
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible,
and liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Okay, we are on to approval of agenda. And tonight we are going to strike the executive session and it will be rescheduled to a later meeting. Other than that, are there any other changes to the agenda? Hearing none, the agenda will stand as presented. We're now on to special orders of the day. There is nothing scheduled, so we'll move to commission and agencies reports. Madam Clerk.
Commission and agency reports. We have Matsu Homelessness Needs Assessment. We'd like to invite Ms. Elizabeth Ripley with the Matsu Health Foundation if you want to come forward, ma'am. And there's the clicker there for the presentation.
Okay, great.
Thank you for requesting this presentation on homelessness in our community. My name is Elizabeth Ripley, and I serve as President and CEO of the Matsu Health Foundation. We care about housing and homelessness because shelter is a primary determinant of health. If you aren't sheltered in a place where you can be safe, warm, and protected, then you won't come close to achieving optimal health. So what does homelessness look like in our city? I remember the first time I really saw the scale of homelessness here. I had coordinated housing for a church group that was flying in one summer to help us do some work in our community. Their plane was delayed, so we ended up meeting for a midnight rendezvous at the Pizza Hut parking lot on Cruzy. When I pulled into the parking lot, there were about 20 or 30 youth wandering around, and there was lots of police cars and police there. And I watched the Wasilla police go over and talk to these youth and encourage them to move on. I could tell that this happened nightly. And I literally watched kids walk off into the woods around the lake and lay down to go to sleep. Thanks to my house and the city's support, this isn't routine anymore. One summer, about 3 years ago, I was driving up Peck from our office on Cruzy, and they had just resurfaced Peck, and it created this high asphalt lip on the right side of the road. A middle-aged woman without legs was in a wheelchair, and she was trying to get from the dirt onto the road to cross over the road to the sidewalk. She couldn't get the wheelchair up onto the road. I pulled over and I ran across the road and asked if I could help. And she said, yeah, help me get the wheelchair onto the asphalt. And try as I might, I could not lift the wheelchair onto the asphalt. She crawled out of the wheelchair onto the road so I could get the wheelchair on. She crawled back into the wheelchair, and people driving by just had looks of horror on their face at the two of us. I took her over to the sidewalk, and at that point we bonded in a strange kind of way, and we exchanged names. And for some reason I asked her where she lived. And that's when she pointed to the tent across the street in the woods that I had driven by daily and never seen. Her name's Janice, and when I saw Janice panhandling in front of the library the next summer, I pulled over again and spoke with her more at length. She told me that she had lost her legs to frostbite from sleeping in the cold. She told me she had never thought homelessness would be something she would experience. I asked her if she had visited Connectmatsu, and she said they had referred her to Links, which was working on getting her Social Security benefits. She spoke about how she tried to help the youth that were homeless in our community. But both these conversations were really thoughtful and coherent. Just last week, we were trading emails internally about a gray-haired, homeless older man who says he's a veteran, and his name is Bruce, who's been verbally abusive to our staff at Connectmatsu, and who is a client of the high utilizer Matsu program at Links, which the foundation funds. Frontline Mission and other nonprofits are helping people who are living in their cars. And Family Promise works with the churches to house families that meet really niche criteria and provide case management services to help them get reemployed and housed. My point here is that there is no one face of homelessness in our city. It's all ages, it's all generations, it's all genders, cultures, and races. A one-size-fits-all approach won't work. We need many different kinds of interventions. We have these stories, but we don't have good numbers. We still can't tell you exactly how many homeless people are in Matsu or in the city, and what their demographics are. And I know that's frustrating to you, and it's frustrating to us, and you'll hear more about that tonight. I can tell you, though, it's a growing problem in our city, it's a growing problem in Matsu, it's a growing problem in Alaska, and it's a growing problem nationwide. So we're not unique in that respect. It's growing in part because of the ordinances and policies we create. It's a growing problem because we don't have enough treatment for mental health services and substance use disorders. So when you listen to the presentation tonight by Thea Bambin and Molly Milius from Acknowledgement, I challenge you to think about this situation from a health in all policies framework. Why, for instance, must a provider of mental health or substance use disorder services get Planning Commission approval when a provider of physical health services does not need to get that? Why can't we find a place in the city limits for a needle exchange, which is an evidence-based harm reduction strategy? These policy actions help increase homelessness and prevent rehousing. We have really remarkable providers working on increasing behavioral health services in our community. So there's really a lot to build on here. My son moved to Boise, which has an ordinance supporting accessory dwelling units that allow homeowners to add tiny homes to their property and rent them out. It has significantly increased affordable housing within healthy, thriving neighborhoods. Lastly, I just want to thank you all for caring about this issue. Mayor Ledford called me one day trying to find resources for 2 homeless gentlemen that showed up at City Hall. She was frustrated with her options, and this presentation will show you some of the reasons why. But thank you for caring, Mayor. I hope even after tonight that you include us in further dialogue to really move upstream on this issue and prevent homelessness. Right now, there are families in our community on the brink of homelessness, and we need to prevent them from becoming homeless. And as I mentioned at the beginning, shelter is a determinant of health, and local government is absolutely part of the solution. So I'm going to turn it over to Jim Beck right now. Jim is a senior program officer with the Matsu Health Foundation, and he leads our work in this area of housing and homelessness. And thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, members of the council. As Elizabeth said, my name is Jim Beck, and I am a senior program officer with the Matsu Health Foundation. I will just say a few words of introduction and turn the rest of the talk over to our excellent consultants from Acknowledgement, Thea Acknowledgement and Molly Milius. As Elizabeth said, just really want to thank you all for your interest in this topic. I guess I could say I was excited after talking to Crystal I wasn't excited that it was such a struggle, but I was excited about how interested you all are in this issue, and I know that we're really looking forward to partnering with you further as we develop this project a bit more. So we had been planning this homelessness needs assessment for probably 2 years before we actually really launched. And our consultants, Beck, were working on this very diligently last year. And I'm going to see if I can there it is. So really, we just wanted to answer a series of questions to begin with. We wanted to see if we could wrap our arms around the homeless situation in the Matsu. As Elizabeth said, our data is imperfect, but it's a pretty good start at this point. Beck has then been working on preparing what we call a gaps model, really looking at what is missing, honestly, given the numbers that we believe we have. Are there types of housing or types of service providers that we don't have that could really help move this problem along? Spent a lot of time reaching out to stakeholders. Beck will go into that a little bit more. And then we've compiled findings into a report that is not 100 pages. It's much shorter than that. It's very readable and beautiful. We're kind of looking at the final stages of that, and we'll certainly disseminate that to all interested parties as soon as that is done. But in the meanwhile, we are doing this presentation on the road, and we'll take this presentation everywhere we can. And again, we appreciate your interest tonight. And Thea and Molly, if you are out there, I'd like to turn it over to you. We're on the land acknowledgement slide.
Great. Thank you very much, Jim and Elizabeth, and thank you, Madam Mayor and members of the council. My name is Thea Agnew-Bemben. I'm a principal and one of the owners of Beck, and we are privileged to work with the Matsu Health Foundation and all of your community members to develop this homelessness needs assessment for Matsu. I want to start us off this evening with a land acknowledgement. I'm joining tonight from the shores of Connectmatsu, just across Connectmatsu from probably where many of you are. And I want to acknowledge that I'm joining tonight from the traditional lands of the Dena'ina people that stretch all the way to where you are. And then if we keep going up the rivers, we'll be in the lands of the Acknowledgement people. So I just want to thank them for their stewardship and for sharing their lands with all of us. We can go to the next slide. So we just wanted to start, and actually Elizabeth really covered this with the stories that she shared with you. And I'm sure many of you who've thought about this issue and, as Elizabeth mentioned, tried to address it for certain individuals, you probably already know that there are as many causes for homelessness as there are people who experience it. And on this slide here, we've tried to pull out some of the themes that we heard as we did the stakeholder process for this study. So as Molly is going to share with you, we've had numerous small group meetings and then many interviews with individuals. And what we can tell you is that in your communities, just like in other Alaska communities and communities around the country, when a person is experiencing homelessness, it's usually the result of a variety of factors, and often many more than one is happening at that given time in that person's life. I also just want to share some, on the next slide, some quotes that we heard from the interviews that our team conducted with individuals in the Matsu who are experiencing homelessness or who have in the recent past. And I'm not going to read these out. I don't want to take up your time with that right this minute, but just to let you know, these are all in the packet that was shared with you. And so I would just invite you to read through these and just like Elizabeth was sharing, kind of hear some of the stories directly from people experiencing homelessness. But with that, I'd like to go to the next slide and hand it over to my colleague, Molly Malias, who's been the project manager for this project, and she's going to walk you through the findings and recommendations.
Thanks, Thea, and thanks everyone again for the opportunity to present here tonight. As Thea mentioned, I'm going to be sharing our key findings and our recommendations. We will be moving through these fairly quickly, but do invite your questions at the end. So you can go ahead and move to the next slide. And as Jim mentioned earlier, a key part of our project was to begin to estimate and quantify what homelessness looks like in Matsu. So we did prepare a gaps model, And we estimate that there are 630 households experiencing homelessness in Matsu each year. You can see some of the sources we use to identify that number at the bottom of the slide. And Jim, you can take us to the next slide. However, we recognize that many of those households are being housed today through existing programs, so we're not starting at zero. So we estimate that about 340 households are currently being served through the really strong network of providers that exists currently. However, if you want to take us to the next slide, we know the community is not currently fulfilling the need, as evidenced by some of the anecdotes that were shared earlier, and then of course what we see in the data. So we estimate that there are about 290 households that's the estimated gap who are not currently receiving services in Matsu. And so as we walk through our findings and share our recommendations, we're really thinking about how we can begin to close that gap so we're fully meeting the need. So now I'm just going to walk through and share a little bit of information about our process. We did use quite a few different data inputs, but we also collected feedback from organizations, from businesses, and individuals. So if you take us to slide 11, you can see here our list of steering committee members. I won't read these all off, and as Thea mentioned, they are in your packet, but we had really robust participation from a very engaged committee who helped guide the process, helped us make sure that we were talking with the right folks and pulling the right information together. And then in addition to the steering committee, we did host a series of focus groups and also conducted interviews. And so we really did our best to seek out perspectives from both traditional partners like the homelessness service providers, as well as non-traditional partners, and of course individuals who are experiencing homelessness right now. So next we're going to share some of the themes that we heard through our data and our outreach, starting with strengths. And so on slide 14, you can see some of the strengths that we heard through our outreach process. And so we know Matsu is a relatively small community, and providers today are working really closely together to find solutions, to innovate, and to improve together. They had a lot of examples where, you know, it was 4:30 on a Friday, and they're working their best to collaborate and find a solution to a family that walks in the door and needs a place to go. Also, Matsu does receive funds for homelessness prevention programs that have been really effective at helping connect families with housing, with funds for housing. And also definitely heard a lot of really positive comments about the youth homelessness providers in Matsu, and in particular My House and Choosing Our Roots for the work that they're doing to support youth who are experiencing homelessness. And then also there seems to be a growing awareness of homelessness in Matsu as an issue and as a priority, and a willingness for folks coming to the table who want to address it, I think is evidenced by this conversation tonight. On the next slide, you can see some of the misconceptions about homelessness that we heard. So we asked both providers and individuals with lived experience what misconceptions they saw or they heard in the community about homelessness. And so those include that homelessness is a choice, that homelessness doesn't actually exist in Matsu. Also an acknowledgement that homelessness looks a little bit different in Matsu than maybe it does in Anchorage. And so it can include those who are couch surfing, those who are living in a vehicle. And also the belief that individuals experiencing homelessness cannot be helped, which given the many success stories and the data we know is not the case. On the next slide, we have some data from Connectmatsu here. Connectmatsu is an information and referral organization in Matsu. They offer information and resources on many topics, but you can see here on the chart that housing has been their top request. So since they launched, the top issue they receive calls and inquiries on is about housing, and those numbers have actually increased over the past few quarters. They also, as they receive calls and referrals, identify where there are system gaps, so where staff were unable to meet a need with a referral, and the largest number of gaps that they received were housing related, where they were unable to connect someone with a resource to meet their need. All right, and on our next slide, we have a few slides here that identify some areas for improvement that we heard through our process. The first is the lack of a low barrier short-term housing option for households. So for people seeking a place to sleep for that particular night, or someone in crisis, there are very few options today. And so we did hear that some people end up going to anchored shelters to meet that need. On the next slide, we have a little bit of data here about housing and affordable housing. Of course, homelessness stems from challenges accessing housing. And so I think thinking about affordable housing and considering what the housing portfolio looks like is really important as we're thinking about and talking about homelessness. So we see in the data that over half of Matsu renters are cost burdened, and then Matsu has the lowest vacancy rate in the state. So this certainly contributes to homelessness in Matsu and needs to be part of the solution. On the next slide, we saw in the data and heard through our outreach that there are some populations who are disproportionately represented in the homelessness system and experiencing challenges in Matsu. That includes folks with a disability, LGBTQ+ individuals, and people of color. We also identified as an area for improvement the lack of a formal system of care. So I mentioned earlier that providers are working together and are collaborating. However, it's happening very informally. There's not really a formal structure or process in place that guides that collaboration or a shared set of policies or data. There are also a lot of community partners that are unfamiliar with the services offered by providers that could likely help and be an effective part of the solution in Matsu. And then also there needs to be clear entry points to services and housing. Right now there are few options for walking in and having a unified, organized way to connect with the services that exist today in Matsu. And finally, our last area for improvement is around behavioral health and substance abuse disorder support. First, I do want to acknowledge that the community has made really amazing strides here. There has been an increase in treatment beds. However, there's certainly an additional need for improved coordination. There is limited crisis care, although there is a planning effort underway with Crisis Now to increase access to crisis care. And then in general, kind of the lack of a coordinated and trauma-informed system of care for behavioral health. So we identified that as a need. And finally, the numbers that we're sharing with you today and the findings, they are based on the best data available, but we know data is really limited in Matsu. However, we did talk with steering committee members, shared a lot of these numbers, and they did help ground truth them with us and felt that in general, they felt like they were accurate and were capturing the need that they were seeing through their work. You will see in some of our recommendations that we do identify data improvements as a really important next step. So with that, let's go to our recommendations. So we did identify some preliminary next steps as part of this process, and the steering committee at our final meeting together reviewed these recommendations. We're all really excited to see them and emphasized over and over how they really want to see action and change. And so there's definitely a lot of energy and enthusiasm, I think, to see some of these recommendations move forward. So if we go to the next slide, slide 24, we have two main categories of recommendations, so 7 recommendations total. The first are around system improvements, so how can we improve our community response system as a whole, and the other is thinking about what steps we need to take to fill the gaps that we identified in our gaps analysis. So starting with the improving the system recommendations, you can see our 3 recommendations here. The first one is to really formalize the processes and policies that are in place for the community, and create a more solid partnership. So that partnership will define how the community responds, what tools and resources are available, and make sure that everyone is organized and operating effectively and strategically in the same direction. Number 2 is to convene private, nonprofit, and government funders to develop a funding plan. So how can the community work together and bring resources to the table? Of course, this includes government, so I'm happy that we're having this conversation today, to develop a funding plan to meet all of those needs. It really does involve multiple partners and I think really strategic collaboration together. And then finally, as I mentioned earlier, there is a need for improved data integration. And a key part of this is for all providers to commit to using the Homeless Management Information System, or HMIS, which is a centralized data tool that can be used for referring and tracking progress. And we can go to the Fill the Gaps recommendation slide. So here we have 4 recommendations. The first is to develop and launch a coordinated entry system. And so really improving access that helps centralize all the intake, assessment, and referrals for people coming in that are seeking services to make sure that they're getting the best location and best service based on their needs. The second is to expand diversion. Diversion is a fairly broad term, but it's essentially a strategy where each response is tailored to someone's specific current situation. And so it looks at how to divert them from becoming homeless in the first place. So we saw in our data an opportunity to expand diversion and reduce the reliance on some of the more heavy needs programs and services that can also be more costly. Number 3 is to invest in supportive housing. This includes rapid rehousing and permanent supportive housing types. So this is subsidized housing paired with wraparound services, which best practices show is a very effective and a really critical piece of an effective homelessness response system. And finally, we recommend convening housing developers and property owners to come together and really talk a little bit longer term about the development of supportive housing, how those projects will get funded, what the greatest needs are, and how the community can come together to meet those needs over the coming years. So I will hand it back to Jim in case he has any closing comments before we open it up for questions. But again, just want to reiterate how grateful we are for the opportunity to be here tonight. So Jim, I'll bounce it back to you.
Thank you, Molly, and I will just make a couple very brief comments before I turn it over to you all for questions. This work will be continuing. You're looking at about a year's worth of work in this assessment thus far, and where we're heading next really is to begin to continue planning and implement these recommendations that you just saw, the 7. So really trying to come up with a shared community vision, doing some strategic planning about how this is all going to roll out. We'll continue to be guided by a steering committee. We may add and subtract some members depending on what the needs of the project is and the interest of the participants. As Molly mentioned, beginning to implement a funding plan, and ideally really be turning some of this work over to some sort of a neutral, I almost want to use the word oversight body that can be that coordinated entry, coordinated element that helps people find where they need to go while we begin to build out the gaps that people are currently experiencing that might be keeping them homeless. And so I'll leave it at that for now because I know we'll be talking again, but would certainly welcome any questions from anybody.
Is there any
Madam
question?
Mayor, Councilman Brown.
Councilmember Brown.
Yes, the energy presenters, thanks for the presentation and very good information. Do any of you have any suggestions or recommendations on anything that could be done immediately? The things you have presented will take time to put together and put in operations. Is there anything that you are suggesting that we could do as a city in a very short time to help the homeless?
I think one thing that might be useful, and I'll also ask Thea or Molly, but I think as Elizabeth mentioned, just even a policy review at the city level to see if there are ordinances or practices that that might be contributing to the issue. I think your continued support of organizations like Valley Residential Services, who just continues to develop housing that is solving lots and lots of problems. for families especially. So it's an organization that we support when we can. And I think it sounds like a weak answer, but just continuing to support organizations that are effective, like My House. I mentioned Valley Residential Services.
Thank you, Mr. Brown. Is there further questions?
I have a question. I know I saw on here that it could take someone 2 to 3 months maybe to get housing or get through a program. And I appreciate what Council Member Brown said, what can we do to, if someone's homeless, it's hard to be on the street a couple months. Now, I talk to people who are on waiting lists. Is it for Section 8 maybe, or
Most likely, yes.
And they're like, well, I'm on a waiting list. They said it's going to be 2 years. So I have a baby and I'm couch surfing. So, yeah, it's like, why does it take so long to help these people?
Yeah, and Thea, Molly, any comments on that particular question?
Yeah, I can try and answer that, and then really the best way to answer that would be to get some information straight from Alaska Housing Finance Corporation. But essentially, the way their choice voucher system works is that they have different programs for different kind of target populations. So someone with children would be in one group. Someone who's coming out of corrections, there's a voucher program for those folks. There's one for people with disabilities, and all of them simply have enough to serve, the number of households that can be served with the funding that's available. And then for many of those programs, it's time limited. So over time, the amount of the subsidy to the person's rent is decreasing as that person's employment income and other income is increasing. And they don't all work that way. For example, the one for people with disabilities doesn't have a time limit on it, but for the one for working families does. And so over time, some people are graduating from that program, and then that they're able to open the wait list up for others. And then another time that they'll open the wait list will be if there's additional federal or state funding that's made available that allows them to serve more people. And so I think that's, the other gentleman asked the question of, what can we do right now? I don't have any idea what type of ARPA monies or other funding that you're, might be appropriating right now. But when you do have those, and just like Jim said, there are lots of opportunities to add funding to your providers that are doing things like rapid rehousing, which is usually giving a time-limited amount of assistance to somebody to help them pay their rent, do, first and last month's rent, security deposit, get them into a unit, and then help them get employment so that then over time they're able to take that on themselves. And so I think that type of support can really help people whose need for support can be met in that way. There are other people who maybe have a chronic disability or a mental health issue, substance use disorder, or just have more advanced physical needs, and their needs may not be met by that type of rapid rehousing. But there will be many folks whose needs can be met. So I think there are ways that you can deploy resources that can meet immediate needs like that and help more people kind of get back on their feet quickly. Kind of long-winded answer, sorry.
That's okay. Any other questions from council? Mr. Graham.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. And thank you, Elizabeth. We've known each other for a long time, and I've always admired the work and the work ethic and the spine that you bring to the work that you've done over the many years since you've been here in Matsu. Also, thank you, Jim and Molly and Thea, for the presentation. My first question, and I have several here, is talk about households that have been affected by homelessness. What's the definition of a household? Is that one person? Is that a parent and child? I mean, what are we calling a household? Could I get a definition of that, please?
Thea, Molly, family or household definition.
Yeah, this is Molly. I would be happy to jump in and address that question. So a household is defined as it varies a little bit depending on the population you're serving. So a family with children, for example, would be counted as one household, even though it may be more than one. For adults, when we're looking at adults, in some cases, a single adult household might just be one individual, or it might be a pair of adults. And then when we're looking at youth, typically those are just a household of one. And so we break those numbers out in a little bit more data in the report that we're finalizing. And so you'll be able to see that in a little bit more granularity. But it does vary a little bit depending on the population that we're looking at.
Yeah, that's helpful to know what the term means. Thank you very much. Looking through the slides that you provided, and thank you for providing the paper copies as well. That makes it helpful. You talked about the steering committees, the makeup of the steering committee, and I noticed an awful lot of social service agencies in there and persons with interest in social services, which is pretty much everybody. But I didn't specifically see any churches or church groups listed, nor did I see any sort of family-oriented groups listed there. And the reason I bring that up is, over the years, over the decades, we've seen the dilution of family values over the years, which has led in part to the crisis that we have now. It's not just a crisis of substance abuse. It's not just a crisis of crime. It's a dilution of family values, where the value of a family unit has been degraded over the years and has been redefined and restricted by the government. You mentioned that you're going to be adding other persons to your steering group. Are you looking towards adding folks that bring a little bit different perspective? Because the long-term fix here isn't money, it's a change in values. I would think that would be one of the discussions.
Yeah, we'll be looking at who we need for this second phase of the project in terms of implementation, and we're always really open to all of those groups. I think Family Promise is a fantastic example of an organization that works with many churches to house families. And I believe they were either on the steering committee or one of our key informant interviews. And Thea, Molly, I don't know if you want to add to that, but I think your point is well taken, Councilor.
So are you looking for people to come to you and say, hey, we want to be on your steering committee, or are you going out and recruiting different sectors to be on your steering committee?
Both.
Both. Okay.
Yep.
Yeah, and this is Molly. I'd be happy to chime in. I would like to add, too, that many of the agencies that we did talk with are faith-based, and that does inform the work that they do. For example, two that come to mind are Family Promise and Valley Charities. We also did interview some church representatives as a part of our interview process. And so, for example, I spoke with Henry Woodall with First Presbyterian Church of Wasilla, and he definitely informed some of the thoughts and also provided some really helpful information on the really critical role that churches do play today in helping house individuals that are in need of housing, and also providing some supplemental funding. So we definitely really recognize how important the faith community is in responding to homelessness, and can revisit our steering committee composition as well as we go into the next phase.
Thank you, Thea, and thank you, Jim. Also, you said one of your goals was to end homelessness. Since before biblical times, homelessness has been an issue. So is ending homelessness a reasonable goal? Isn't there wouldn't a more reasonable goal be to have a method of dealing with, persons who are homeless, or to be able to refer or to channel people so that their homelessness is a truly temporary and time-limited thing?
I think that's really the goal, to borrow Anchorage's goal that homelessness be brief and one time. Yes. Professionally, I'd find it hard to put down on a piece of paper that my goal was to almost end homelessness, but it's a good point. I think it will be difficult for us to say, yay, we've solved it, now we can go work on another issue. But I think what you're alluding at is building the system that works for people, so that it is brief, They know where to go to get those services, and they come out the other end productive, hopefully employed, able to support themselves and not ever be in that situation again.
Thank you. And then
And-
the other.
Oh, I could,
Go ahead.
sorry.
Go ahead, please.
Oh, this is Dia. I could just quickly add one thing about the goal that you mentioned. One of the really successful efforts in the United States and also here in Alaska has been around veteran homelessness, and the term that they use and that's now been adopted more generally and for other populations is the term functional zero. And really all that means, and this is why we do this approach that you've seen tonight around a GAPS model, really what that means is that the supply of services and housing to meet the need of people who are experiencing homelessness is pretty much equal to the demand. So when someone has that, like as Jim was saying, brief, rare, and one-time experience of homelessness, there's the services and the housing available to meet the need. And of course, it's always cycling. People are always cycling out of those units. New people are going to be experiencing homelessness, as you said. And so the goal is that the community system can meet the need as it happens without people having to wait or get, cycled around through 10 different agencies before they find the right thing.
I think that sounds a whole lot better than a general goal of ending homelessness. Just kind of takes things off track a little bit when we say end it, when we know that that's not a possibility. So one of the other things you talked about was to develop a funding plan, and you talked about the private sector and you talked about government in there, but you didn't really discuss, what is government's role in that funding plan, and is that a temporary funding plan? Is this a long-term plan? That wasn't really brought up there, and this is, my ability or my opportunity here to say that the role of the government, while we can provide temporary funding, not necessarily the city, but government agencies, government in general, can provide some temporary funding, providing the real role of government is to provide an environment that helps end homelessness, that helps bring this homelessness to the functional zero point by providing jobs, by providing, and when I say not the government providing jobs, but by providing an environment that encourages people to invest in the community, which provides jobs, encourages people to invest in different types of housing, whether it's for, single-family housing or multi-unit housing, some, income-dependent housing. That's one of the, functions of government is to provide that environment, not necessarily to provide the funding to different agencies to make things happen. The biggest thing the government can do, in my opinion, is to help build the environment to make you successful in that arena. Thank you again for all being here. Elizabeth, it's great to see you.
Thank you.
Is there any further discussion? Okay, I have a question. Elizabeth referred to Bruce. We all know Bruce. He's been around forever. And Bruce is happy being Bruce. He has a family here and he does not want to live with them. He has a little motor home that he stays in. MEA lets him park it on their little plot up there, whatever. How do you suggest you deal with people like Bruce? Because he don't want no help.
I think it's awfully hard to force people to receive help that they don't want.
Exactly.
So following up on that, you state here one of the misconceptions of homelessness is homelessness by choice. We do feel, or we do see, that there are people like Bruce out there who actually choose. I can list several others as well. So I think within the misconception, there is homelessness by choice. In fact, if you really go through Matsu in the summertime, you see a huge influx of homeless people and panhandlers and whatever, and then they diminish in the wintertime. And I do realize, after I made the negative statement of saying, yes, there is that, and that there is the misconception, and that statement is true, there is homeless by choice. I also do realize that there's many, many people who really need the services. So I'm not trying to downplay that, but I don't want the message to be just simply told, well, homelessness is, there are homeless out there by choice. And we're not going to be able to solve the people like Bruce or these other people. Thank you.
Is there any other questions? Yes, go ahead.
Oh, this is Dee. I didn't know. I could respond to that a little bit if you want, but I wasn't sure.
Sure, go ahead.
Did you want me to respond? Just to say that I think you're absolutely right. Just like, we said at the beginning, really there's as many causes of homelessness as there are people experiencing it. And just like any of us, we all have our own opinions about where and how we want to live. And so I think you're absolutely right that it's really important when you're trying to develop your system to address homelessness that there are lots of different options. And I think another thing that you're pointing to, which again is really important, is that people who have or are experiencing homelessness be engaged in figuring out what the right solutions are. And so, like, for example, right now we're helping a group that really wants to have like a tiny home community, and they're looking for a piece of land and they want to build their own tiny homes and help people who are coming out of corrections and people who are coming out of treatment for substance use disorder, get on their feet through tiny homes. That's one approach. It's not going to work for everybody. Other people are going to need, for example, assisted living and making it easier and giving people assistance getting into an assisted living home. Some people are going to want a kind of sanctioned camping, and some communities have really tried to make that work. So I think you're right. Sometimes you need day shelters for people like Bruce, who, maybe want to live in his motorhome, but kind of still need somewhere to go during the day. That can also be part of your library. So there's lots of different ways that your community can kind of figure out what are the needs of the people that we have, what are their preferences, and how can we kind of best use what we have to meet them. So I think that's just a part of developing a system that works for you and your community. Yeah, so I think you're right.
Thank you. Any other questions? Thank you so much. We appreciate you coming and giving the report.
Thank you, Mayor, council members. Appreciate your time.
Next up is 6.2 is waste.
I'm sorry.
We have a 5-minute break.
Recess.
Recess. And I hope I don't mess your name up, probably will. Dean Sita? Sita. Okay. Thank you.
I'm Dean Sitta. I am a engineer and project manager with Stantec Consulting Services. One of the things that Stantec does is municipal utilities, and we've been working with the City of Wasilla in various capacities for a number of years now on some problems at your wastewater treatment plant. There is a detailed report in your agenda package. My presentation is going to be a fairly quick and high-level overview of what we're doing at your wastewater plant. But then at the end of that presentation, I'll have time to answer your questions. So, perfect, thank you. We're going to do a little bit of a project overview about the wastewater treatment plant pilot study project, what that is. We'll talk about some of the work that's been completed to date. Talk about some of the results and findings thus far. We'll talk about where we're heading next and some of the issues that we might encounter along the way. So the wastewater plant is located south of the Walmart on Old Matanuska Road. A lot of people have never been there. Most people don't have any reason to go there. It's a little hard to find. But it was originally constructed in the late 80s, about 1988. And you can see the lower portion of the photo, below the two white aerated lagoons, is this clearing in the forest. Those are buried infiltration beds, and that was the first phase of the wastewater plant, 1988. The treatment lagoons themselves were added a little later, about 1994. This facility started having problems in the early 90s when wastewater flows began exceeding about 100,000 gallons per day. And for perspective, the current wastewater flow treated at that facility is about 350,000 gallons per day. Next, please. So the primary problems are twofold. At flows above 100,000 gallons per day, wastewater leaks out of the slope below the wastewater treatment plant, seeps into a little stream and some wetlands near the wastewater plant. And bear in mind that the plant's presently operating at about 3 times that capacity. The other issue is these buried infiltration beds deposit a wastewater component known as nitrate directly into the groundwater. Nitrate is a nitrogen compound. It's residual of proteins in the wastewater. Ammonia is converted into nitrate. That happens in the groundwater, and then that leaves the wastewater treatment plant site. Nitrate presents health risks when consumed in groundwater, so it's considered a pollutant. The wastewater plant is permitted to discharge a certain level of nitrates, but is regularly approaching or occasionally exceeding that limit. So during an earlier condition assessment of the facility, when some of these problems were identified, the City of Wasilla, the Public Works Department, Stantec, we had considered using the large wetland parcel adjacent to the wastewater plant for effluent disposal. There's a considerable science that says that natural or man-made wetlands can be used to treat wastewater. A number of biological processes. The growing vegetation readily takes up the nitrogen in the form of ammonias and nitrates. The phosphorus converts it into plant matter. The soils are naturally hostile to most bacteria. There's all sorts of microbes living in the soil that further eat the nitrogen. And then there's just basic filtration through the vegetated mat, the root mat, the muskeg. So the city acquired this land. It's about 77 acres total. 39 acres are wetlands of various types, and contracted with Stantec to develop and implement a pilot study project to basically prove that this wetland would work for disposing of the city's treated wastewater effluent. That study began in 2017 under a temporary authorization from Department of Conservation. This time we have 2 years of background data that were collected before we started discharging wastewater, and 3 years of pilot study results. We have 3 summers of data, and right now we have 2 winters of data. This is the 3rd winter. The system will have been in operation. So at this point in time, we believe we have enough data to demonstrate that this is an effective system. So it is basically time to apply for the permanent discharge permit from state of Alaska. We could go back to the slide. The way the system works, there is a pipe extending from the top of the wastewater plant to the very north side of the wetlands. There are a total of 7 diffusers located along the edge of the wetland that distribute the wastewater effluent over the wetlands. The ground has a slight slope to the south, and so once that effluent is applied to the wetland, it works its way through the vegetation and the muskeg over a period of several days, and then it emerges in a little spring and stream feature at the bottom of the wastewater plant where it collects and flows out. So this is an example of one of the diffusers during the construction in spring of 2018. It's basically a very simple rock bed, about 20 feet wide. It's 3 feet thick. We're actually applying the effluent not just to the surface where it works its way through the vegetative mat, but we're applying some of the effluent to the first several feet of the muskeg so that it can move through the soil too. Next, please. So this is what it looks like 2 years later. Obviously the vegetation is liking the effluent. It's very healthy and lush. All of the photos in here, by the way, are various pictures throughout the wetland for retrospective. The sign there is just a notice that that is indeed wastewater effluent. So the pilot study monitors a total of 19 surface sites where we collect water sample from the surface water to measure water quality, and then 16 groundwater wells where we're doing the same thing at various depths to determine if we have anything like metals or toxics that are working their way into the deep groundwater. We are also monitoring 11 private wells on the home sites that surround the projects. The private wells are monitored once a year for basic wastewater contaminants and constituents. There's no evidence that we're seeing any wastewater migrating out of the wetland. Just the physical configuration of this wetland, the slope of the earth, just very conducive to what we want to do here in the way of effluent disposal. And then a little bit of a color splash here. We're also using a drone with a multi-spectrum camera to monitor the health of the vegetation in the wetland, to tell how well the vegetation is growing, if it's stressed or if it's converting, changing types from grasses to trees or vice versa. So in terms of results, we have operated this facility now for about 2 years at 300,000 gallons per day, which is nearly the entire flow of the wastewater treatment plant. Hydraulically, the wetlands can handle that flow just fine, and probably about half again as much. We are seeing excellent nitrate removal within the first half of the wetland, about 600 feet. Nitrate levels are basically, we start at somewhere between 15 and 30, and we end up less than 1. And that's only in the first half of the wetlands. Excellent bacteria removal. Bacteria levels in the wetlands are indistinguishable from background. Bear in mind that we have moose and birds and maybe the occasional bear in here. There are definitely bacteria in the wetland, but you can't say that this is a wastewater bacteria. It's indistinguishable from when we started. We have done some human DNA studies of the bacteria, and we have not been able to locate any human bacteria within 200 feet of the discharge. This facility can operate year-round, at least hydraulically. The ground is warm enough that the wastewater will remain flowing. We do begin building ice later in the year, in the February-March timeframe, and that can be problematic because once the ground gets cold, it will no longer treat the nitrates. Instead, it begins to accumulate them, and it stores an inventory or a stockpile of nitrate. And if we build up too much of that, when we get spring melt, that can wash off the site. But we are seeing that the water quality below the wastewater treatment plant has improved drastically. The stream that flows off the wastewater plant site has the lowest level of nutrients and nitrate in it that it's ever had since we've been studying that stream for about 6 years now. Next, please. So the next steps are to apply for a discharge permit. That comes from the State of Alaska Pollution Discharge Elimination System, the APDES system administered by State of Alaska. We're projecting that it will take probably on the order of 8 to 12 months to prepare and get that permit approved. And while that is happening, we are proposing to ask DEC to administratively extend the pilot study so the discharge can continue while that permit is working its way through the system. This is working, and I think most parties involved who have been reviewing the data are pleased to see how it works, and it's an especially low maintenance solution here. Essentially no energy and almost no maintenance involved in continuing this. Now, there are some potential issues. The biggest one is with the permitting. An interesting set of rulings. The DEC rules do not allow DEC to permit a discharge that results in, quote, degradation of a wetland. Wastewater, by definition, is a degrading substance. So in the strictest interpretation of their rules, DEC believes that applying wastewater to the wetlands in this matter is degrading the wetlands. Our job is to show DEC that, in fact, we have not degraded the wetlands. This is not causing any harm. In fact, it's probably beneficial to the wetlands. Alternately, we will need to have either DEC or the EPA declare the wetlands are a wastewater treatment facility. The Corps of Engineers, who's responsible for regulating wetlands, has a very clearly documented policy that wastewater treatment facilities are not subject to Corps regulation. But it becomes a little bit of a catch-22. Someone has to be willing to raise their hand and declare it a wastewater treatment facility. Winter operations, as I alluded to, while the facility will operate hydraulically, it collects and stores nutrients. In the winter, it doesn't really treat them very well. We are expecting that DEC is going to require upgrades to the wastewater treatment plant to improve winter removal of nitrates. And a couple of the options for that are discussed in the agenda package in the written report. Then we have sludge removal. Right now, to remove accumulated sludge from the wastewater plant, the operators drain the lagoon and they manually vacuum it out from the bottom. It's discharged onto the cleared land and into the forest surrounding the wastewater treatment plant. But unfortunately, that results in some process upsets and spikes in nitrates that wash off the ground surface when it rains. So there is an option to create a more mechanized sludge removal process that would dewater the sludge so that it could either be stored dry on site or landfilled, which would eliminate that nitrate problem. So that's been a very brief, high-level overview of the pilot study. I'd be happy to answer anyone's questions.
Mr. Graham.
You looked at me automatically. That's amazing. Thank you, sir. I appreciate your report here. I guess my biggest question would have to do with the future. So if the city of Wasilla wants to expand its ability to treat wastewater, we only have a certain percentage of our residents have, wastewater treatment available to them at this point. Most are treated via septic systems on their own sites. Is this site going to be able to handle much more than it currently is, or are we nearing capacity?
The answer to that is not simple, and paradoxically, it's probably both. We have tested the wetlands to 300,000 gallons per day. Part of the science behind this project is a biological model developed in Canada known as subwet. We have modeled this wetland as part of the pilot study approval, and it has been modeled to 500,000 gallons per day. And it does work at 500,000 gallons per day. As part of the APDES application, We're going to be taking the data from the pilot study and using that to calibrate and update the subwet model. Whatever number it kicks out, that's what we're going to ask for. So we're hopeful that we can permit this facility for $500,000. That will be our ask. DEC will be conservative, and rightly so, and maybe they'll give us something between 300 and 500.
So there is room for expansion,
There
which
is.
is great to hear. Also, you used the term nutrients. So you talked about nitrates being bad, but then you talked about the nutrients that are added, through this effluent treatment process. But you sounded like you were concerned about nutrients. Are we adding too many nutrients during this process, or are we at a level where we need to be concerned about adding nutrients?
So nutrients is a term in the wastewater treatment industry that generally refers to both nitrogen and phosphorus compounds. And both of them are byproducts of wastewater treatment. Nitrogen and phosphorus together can create algae blooms. Phosphorus is not generally considered to be toxic, whereas the nitrogen compounds, particularly ammonia, are toxic to fish. But in Alaska anyway, phosphorus is not regulated in surface discharges. So what we primarily need to concern ourselves with are the nitrogen compounds, ammonia and nitrate. Ammonia is toxic and will be most regulated. Nitrate is primarily a concern if it enters a fish habitat where it causes an algae bloom and can consume oxygen. We don't have those situations here. So we probably don't have those types of issues in front of us, but I do expect DEC to look at that as part of their overall wetlands degradation concern.
Thank you. Appreciate your presentation.
Are there any other questions? Hearing none, thank you, sir. We appreciate you coming and giving us the update.
Happy to do it.
Now we are moving on to the Airport Advisory Commission. We'll now hear from the Public Works Director on the recent Airport Advisory Commission meeting.
Madam Mayor, Danielle Bischoff, Director of Public Works. Through the Mayor to the Council for the Airport Advisory Commission meeting from January 20th. All five commissioners were in attendance last Thursday. We had some great public involvement during the time. The first thing that I'd like to share is the outpouring of appreciation for our staff that's been working out at the airport and maintaining the airport and doing just a fantastic job. They've received accolades multiple times, and I just like to pass that on to all of you. The economic development and interest out at the airport was a topic of great interest, and other users were also expressing their interest in being considered our current users, so that we are incorporating all of our users into our development and our growth as we move forward with the airport, all of the events that we have up there. So, another issue that was brought up is that we were working on runway maintenance this past fall in crack sealing. The crack sealing effort had shown to be a larger effort than was originally anticipated. There will be another runway closure in order to complete that sealing. There was interest expressed that we clearly communicate with the aviation community as to when and for the what sort of duration we'll be looking at in order to accomplish that. There was the request that we look at what work is going to be needs to be accomplished, and if we can do it in any sort of phased cycle. So we will be taking a look at that further. The issue of rates and an evaluation of what our lease rates and tie-down rates are at the airport was brought up, and work is being done to evaluate how we look and compared to other airports. We haven't raised our rates in a lot of years, and so there was support from the commission to continue that evaluation. We had discussion based on the windstorm, and potential mitigation measures for future windstorms were brought up for further discussion down the line. That pretty much encompasses our report for the Airport Advisory Commission.
Are there any questions? Hearing none, thank you. We are on to Parks and Rec Commission. We'll now hear a report from the Recreational Service Director on the recent Parks and Recreation Commission meeting.
Scott Bell, Recreational Services Director, through the mayor to the council members. Reporting the Park and Recreation Commission meeting report from January 12th meeting. There was no quorum for our November meeting, so there was a few items that were readdressed, but we did have a quorum at the January meeting. Recapping some of the past events that the Park and Recreation Commission and Department have participated in includes our Halloween Spooktacular. Yes, going back away, sorry. We did have a free skate at the Menard Sports Center with over 100 people enjoying that. We had what I believe was a very successful New Year's Eve fireworks show at Idita Park. Seemed to be well attended by the amount of traffic and honking horns right afterwards. So that seemed to go pretty good. Parks Department had installed lights on the sledding hill. I guess apparently they had been damaged or vandalized, but they did replace those, so those have been up and operating. Wasilla Lake lights are also up for skating on the lake. And the commission is looking at creating or readdressing, they had begun this prior to COVID, a parks passport, a way to encourage different people in the community to go to different parks, kind of get like a note that they've been there, and then they'll be able to see all the different amenities and things like that that are available. We are anticipating doing the Skate the Lake event March 16th. That is the report at this time.
Any questions? Mr. Graham.
Thank you, Mr. Bell. When do you anticipate opening Wasilla Lake for skating?
Currently is, yes.
Okay,
Yes.
yeah, I saw some activity out there, but I didn't see any people
It's
skating.
all the lights that Park and Rec had installed.
Great, thank you.
Is there any other questions? Thank you, Mr. Bell. Now we are on to Rochelle High School. Do we have a student representative? Okay, would you come forward, please? Yes. Please state your name.
Kiara Holt.
Jaden Goldman.
Good afternoon, Mayor Ledford and council members. On behalf of Rochelle High School, my name is Kiara Holt.
And my name is Jaden Goldman.
The Student Council is currently organizing a Wacko Week activities for in February.
And our school is back in yellow, as I'm sure you know, and we were all wearing masks, and subsequently the student body is down to 30% of total attendance.
Our council, a counselor, Miss Aaliyah, is starting a after-school club to help some of our student body to learn effective coping skills.
And our robotics team is being very successful and recently attended the Colony Robotics Meet.
And that is it for this month. Thank you for your time.
Is there any questions for the council?
Mr. Graham.
It's been a few weeks since I've been to high school. What sort of activities happen during Wacko Week?
It's basically a glorified Spirit Week, so we have...
Minute to Win It. It's like games at like lunch for the week.
Yeah, we also have like, we dress up during a certain amount of days. Like Monday we dress up in pajamas, for example. And there's a lot of competition, just a little fun Spirit Week for our school.
It's nice to know that building school spirit is still part of the activities going on. Thank you.
Yeah.
Any other questions? Mr. Goldman?
Yes.
I understand that you are going to go to work for Senator Lisa Murkowski.
Yes, ma'am, that is correct. I am the page for this upcoming, spring page session. Sunday session, just to say.
Congratulations,
Thank
and
you
we're
very
very
much.
proud of you.
Thank you very much.
So, thank you guys. Okay. Yeah. Are we? Okay, now we are on to public participation. And there are 3 public hearings tonight. Madam Clerk, please read the title.
Thank you. This is our first public hearing. It's on ordinance serial number 2203, amending Wasilla Municipal Code section 1604070 definitions to add definitions for caliper, ground cover, landscape area, lawn, perennial flower, native vegetation existing, landscape vegetation existing, tree preserved, and use change of, amending section 1624040 parking to delete subsection 1624040 D4A through D4C, amending section 1633010 purpose to clarify purpose, amending section 1633030 exemptions to clarify exemption and non-conforming provisions, amending section 1633040 landscape plan to clarify language, amending section 1633050 general landscaping requirements and standards to clarify applicability standards and other minor revisions, amending section 1633060 types of landscaping to add landscape provisions for industrial zoned lots and other minor revisions, amending section 1633080 maintenance and replacement to add clarifying language, amending 1633090 hardship waiver variance to rename the section landscape waiver and add language clarifying pre-application conference requirements and purpose, and amending 1633100 violations penalties to clarify violations and penalties, amending section 120030 disposition of scheduled offenses fine schedule to add fines for landscape violations. And I think that is one of our longest titles in the city of Wasilla history, but very informative, so kudos to the planning staff.
The public hearing on ordinance serial number 22-03 is open. Anyone who would like to testify, please come forward and begin by stating your first and last name. Comments are limited to 3 minutes per person. Seeing no one, public hearing is closed. Is there a motion to adopt ordinance serial number 22-03?
Madam Mayor, I move ordinance serial number 22-03.
Is there a second?
Second.
It's been moved by Councilmember Graham and seconded by Councilmember Harvey to adopt ordinance serial number 22-03. Is there discussion?
Madam Mayor, Councilman Johnson. So I understand that this ordinance here will go back to a committee and then come back to us for final disposition on the ordinances. Is that what I understand?
She said no.
The city planner will answer.
For the record, Tina Crawford, City Planner. No, this ordinance is recommended by the Planning Commission to move forward. What you have later on in your agenda is to appoint a task force that will look at the code in its entirety. This one had a specific strategic points that we were looking at when we were doing updates. The recommendation came in that it should be looked at as a whole. So the recommendation in front of you is for this to move forward and be adopted, and then to have a committee that can make recommendations if there are any other changes that need to be done.
Okay.
Madam Mayor.
Yes. Mr. Graham.
Several questions, and if we could allow Ms. Crawford to
Absolutely.
Continue to be the subject matter expert here, that would be great. Thank you, Tina, for your service over the years as a city planner. So I had, first question is, Do we have any requests pending that make this change, something that's immediately necessary to continue to move forward with the business of the city, as opposed to waiting until after this commission or whatever we're calling it is gonna bring something forward? I mean, planning's been working on this for years, to put it mildly. I think, probably more years than I have fingers. Why are these particular things highlighted, whereas an entire fix is not highlighted at this point?
Certainly, I'll be glad to answer that through the.
Absolutely.
So the purpose that we initially started with was to look at industrially zoned lots. For whatever reason, that just wasn't a topic that came up during the rewrite in 2017. So there was some input from developers that were doing development on industrial zone lots, and I would say rightfully so, said the standards that are for the rest of the commercial developments don't necessarily make sense for us in an industrial park, especially if we're not visible from a major roadway in the city. So that was that was the whole point of this rewrite. It was not a rewrite, it was only to deal with that particular issue. It grew a little bit because we did receive some input since the 2017 update from landscape architects for things that required an interpretation from the city planner versus just a clean application of the code. So we did add those into it, and there were a few other things that grew from some suggestions that we received along the way. The main reason that the commission and staff is recommending that this move forward is our development season, we'll start seeing our applications come in the door in March and April. If we don't move this forward, they will be held to the current more stringent standards that we have in place, rather than taking advantage of the reductions in costs that were testified at the meeting of up to 15 to 20% off the cost of their landscaping. So we want to have those changes in place for this year's development season. That's why we want it to go forward. It's not that we have a project yet. It's not that time of the year where we start seeing these projects come in. But the developers are out there starting to hire architects and landscape people. In fact, I just had one. Midas is coming forward with their plan. And their landscape architect is like, so which one do we go under? Do you think this one's going to be adopted? Should we start drawing our plans that way, or should we use the current code? So we wanted to have these changes because they are all cost savings. There are no increased requirements. They are all decreases, which make it more affordable for development. We wanted it in place this year.
I actually have quite a bit, if I may just continue, and then if any council members want to say something, please do so, and I'd be happy to shut up for a while and let somebody else talk. One of the things you mentioned right off the bat was roads, things that are visible from the roads, and in this amendment it talks about local roads is the one that is mentioned multiple times throughout this amendment. So could you give us a little bit of a rundown on local roads versus, the next two? I mean, I think we have 5 or 6 classifications of roads here in Wasilla, but I mean, local roads versus some of the more significant roads. For instance, Midas is not going to be, the landscaping there is not going to be based on local roads. It's going to be based on a larger collector type.
So maybe I should go backwards just for a minute first and clarify my statement. So we started with industrial, but these cost savings go across the board to every type of development that requires landscaping. So the Midas that's being proposed will see the same cost savings because there are only a few things that are specific to industrial that are on local roads. That's not having flowers, not having a lot of shrubs, not requiring that manicured landscape bed like you see along the Parks Highway and the Palmer Wasilla for Petco and Target and some of those type of developments. Those were determined to be too high of a standard for an industrial. So if you go off Lucas and head west on Mystery, there's a side street, and I apologize, I can't think of what that name is. It goes into that industrial park. That's a local road. So there are about 8 lots that are industrially zoned, and there are some more that may be rezoned that will have interior road systems. 32nd Street or Court is looking to come in off of Lucas. Those are considered local roads. So the ones that only front on that interior road system won't have these standards. They will have street tree requirements, and pretty much, I'm not going to say that's exactly it, but pretty much it's just street trees and grass along the front, so that they still have some green space requirements, but they don't have all the landscape islands on the interior and those kind of things. But commercial businesses will still see reductions, and if you look in your package on 130 and 131 of the 213 page numbers, you'll see a chart that shows those cost savings and those reductions. So even for Midas, instead of having to do 16 flowers per 100 square feet, they'll now only be required to do 9. Trees, interior trees, instead of being 10 feet, will now only be required to be 8 feet. Shrubs, instead of 2 feet, will go to 18 inches, which all of the testimony we've received from landscape architects state that that's a cost savings and there are more plants available at that size. So then if I roll back to yours, the local road only applies to the industrially zoned because their standards are they're very minimal. Unless they front. The one that fronts on Lucas Road or even Mystery is going to have higher standards than the ones interior.
Well, you said they'll have minimal standards. That's not currently the case.
That is correct. They are held to the same standard as a Target would have to do.
Right, thank you. So, reading through this, several different times, a couple things caught my eye on page 5 of 39. Talks about, compliance with regulation to the greatest extent feasible versus the greatest extent possible as determined by the city planner. That sounds like something the lawyer might have thrown in just to confuse me with the terminology there. Is that just to give you a little bit more discretion?
The only change is the word possible to feasible. It means the same thing. It's just more of a term that's used in codes than possible. So that one was just intended to.
Okay. And then down on pages, or same page, lines 133 through 135, must be prepared and sealed by a licensed landscape architect registered in the state of Alaska or a professional with similar landscaping expertise as approved by the city planner. Licensed landscape architects are kind of spending to engage. If you're looking at something that's a 5,000 square foot development and you have to hire a landscape architect, seems like that requirement currently exists, but it seems like we could certainly trim that down. It does mention, professional similar landscaping experience. Is that a list that you would maintain in your office saying, well, Stu Graham's been a landscaper for 20 years. We can take a drawing from him on a napkin from the mugshot and that's fine? Or what's your call there on?
So what I've had, since this was adopted in 2017, I've only had one architect come through and ask for that particular type to be approved to do landscape plans. Unfortunately, they had very minimal experience with landscape plans, or they were very small scale projects that had minimal landscaping tied to them. So they were not approved. I've not had anyone else take advantage of that option that the Planning Commission recommended that be in there. I will tell you that the commission talked about the requirement for a landscape architect as part of the 5 meetings and 2 public hearings that they had last year. They did go back and forth as should it be required or not. They did like the reduction or the removal of the 1 acre size lot because we have small developments on an acre lot. A coffee stand that goes in is a small development, but they may buy a 1 acre lot. So they would have been held to all these standards, but now the only trigger for a landscape architect is a size. And 5,000 square feet is quite large. The McDonald's, don't quote me on it, but I believe it's around 2,500 square feet or 3,000. So you're talking a larger size building. You're not talking a mom and pop little restaurant that shows up on a lot that's being triggered for this. And the reason that they put it in 2017 was the lack of quality of plans, unfortunately, that we were receiving in. So that was what caused them to adopt it in the first place. And then, like I said, after back and forth discussion, they went forward with leaving it in there. But certainly the task force or committee that moves forward with that, they may or may not recommend that change.
And then moving on to page 7, lines 164 and 65, talks about part of the landscaped area must be planted with grass or similar ground cover to create a lawn. You know, as you're well aware, our library has quite a bit of unlandscaped area, which is kind of, you could call it wild land landscaping or something like that. I mean, it's a maintained area, but it's not a lawn. It's not something they got to go out and mow and fertilize and so on and so forth. Is there a definition of lawn somewhere that describes that? So if anybody had any questions.
There is a definition. It's one of the ones that was added. It's on page 2 of 39. If you're looking at those page numbers on line 48 and 49. So, and that's part of the 15%. This doesn't preclude you from retaining some natural areas that you don't have to manage. You would still be allowed to do that. This is identifying, because what the code just said, that grass alone doesn't meet this requirement. So we came up with, well, okay, so grass alone and what amount of it would meet the requirement. And so that's what was decided upon, that would be more clear so they know what their expectations are.
Moving on to page 11 of 39, which is on page 51 of the printed packet, talking about lines 272 and forward. The ratio and height of the trees needs to be less than 5 to 3, meaning that it needs to, or should not be less than 5 to 3, which kind of leaves out some trees that you mentioned here, some poplar, aspens, or some, sort of columnar growths. And in many cases, those actually accent the architecture of the building that's being built. Is there a reason that we're trying to say, well, you can't have, if you have a tree, it has to look like a maple tree or an ash tree or something like that, as opposed to leaving it to these highly paid architects to figure out what's going to be best for them?
Well, this is only if you choose to do an evergreen tree, which is a spruce.
Right.
It doesn't apply to the poplars, to the deciduous trees, the poplars or the columnar aspens or any of those. It's only for the evergreen. And it just has to do with the nature of the way those trees grows and the leaders that they have and the quality of a tree that you get. If you don't have that ratio, you can end up with a skinny tree that isn't well developed with its limbs, and it's not attractive. Sure, they put a tree out there, but it is actually a tree. And this is a standardized type of measurement that's recommended by the American Landscapes Nursery Guide or something like that. So that's where this came from. It's common through a lot of codes to have that so that you get a full, even if it's 4 feet or 6 feet tall, it still has the proper shape to it that a spruce tree is supposed to have.
Well, but proper spruce in the state of Alaska, black spruce, is a columnar tree. Trees with big limbs on them collect a lot of snow and then they break off and then they just become firewood as opposed to trees. But anyway, just a comment there. Continuing on page 14 of 39, line 345. Earlier on, you talked about needing approval from the planner. And on this one here on line 345, it says approval from the city. Who is the city if it's not the planner? Do we need to go to the planning commission? Do we need to go to the city council? Do we need to go to the mayor? Who is the city?
For purposes of this, it's the city planner, but it has, the guarantee is actually written out to the city of Wasilla. It's not to the city of Wasilla Planning Department or to the city planner. So it's just, I don't know if Holly can jump in there. I'll like zing her real quick, but I think it's just, it's the language that was in there and I didn't look to change it.
Well, if the mayor said that's okay, Is that okay, or do we need the planner to say that's okay, or the planning? I'm just uncomfortable with the city.
We can change it to city planner. I mean, I don't know that it implies it. So we have to do a landscape inspection. It could be anybody. It could be the planning clerk. It could be the code compliance officer. It could be me as the city planner. It could be a police officer. It could be anyone that goes out there that's designated, to have that plan and doing an inspection on it. And once it's deemed to met it, then we release the guarantee. So I won't say there was a lot of conversation about that.
So a note to the clerk, if I may, Madam Clerk, when we get through this discussion, I would like to add amendment number 1 on line 345 to strike the word city and insert the word city.
Councilmember Graham?
Yes, ma'am.
I would say on the attorney front, I think it's better to leave it as city only because when you're dealing with a guarantee or a certificate here, you are dealing with multiple individuals. A lot of times when we refer to the planner for the approval process, that's because the nature of the decision being made has a substantive component. You want it going directly to the planner. And then there's other descriptions in your code about what that looks like for you when you're going to the planning office. But here, when we're looking at this guarantee and the certification, the city will have a standard for what that means. It might come from the mayor's office, it might be stamped and approved by the city. It might be it might go through an officer, even a compliance officer. So that gives them, that allows them to make sure and provides greater protection because for the landowner, right? Because it's the guarantee is just going to the city as opposed to the planner where you're walking in and you're participating in a process. So I think that's why it was like that originally. So I would recommend leaving it, but maybe flagging it for the task force to make sure that one thing about planning ordinances, it's always good, as you say, to go and look, who are you sending it to and why, so they have a really good, deliberate conversation about it.
I appreciate that, but I will bring it.
If I may, sir, it's the city there, on 345, that the only.
On 345, delete the word city or add the word planner.
We'll mark it for, thank you, sir.
And then on line 374, which is on page 16 of 39, perhaps I misread this or I'm only reading part of it, but it talks about landscaping, planting bed width. Planting bed width shall be an average of 10 feet with a minimum width not less than 6 feet. Driveways and sidewalks may cross such strips and so on and so forth. But somewhere in here, did it mention that that's only on the street side? Or is that on all sides of the property? I mean, the depictions later on kind of show it on street sides, but it doesn't. Either it doesn't say that or I missed that.
If you go back to the previous page, which is page 15, line 363, that's your header. Yeah, I know all the indents. And then you go A and then 3 on 368. This is dealing with your perimeter landscaping. So this is only the landscape bed along the road.
Okay, so the perimeter doesn't mean all 4 sides of the property?
That is correct. It is only along the road frontage.
Appreciate that. And then moving on to page 17, looking at line 412 and going forward. So it talks about the landscape planting bed with grass and mulch and a 6-foot tall opaque fence. So we're talking about we need to have the landscaping, we need to have the perimeter landscaping, and then we need, in addition to that, to have an opaque fence.
No, so lines 404 through, let's see, 411.
Right.
That's your normal perimeter requirement.
Right.
And then E, if you don't want to do that, you can do this other one. So you can put a fence up, then you don't need the ground the ground cover mulch. You can do with grass, and you don't have to have the shrubs, and you don't have to have the perennial flowers. So you can just put a
But
fence up
instead, you would have a 5-foot wide
bed instead of a 10.
bed and a 6-foot fence.
Yes.
Sounds,
And then you would still have to have shrubs and trees, but you wouldn't have to have the flowers, and you wouldn't have to have the 10-foot width with those plantings that are required within that square footage. So it reduces it by half, plus removes the flowers.
when you're talking about industrial properties, you know, fencing is part of the nature of the security of the property. And the opaque fence, I think, is great. You know, it allows, you know, the police officers to see a little bit of what's going on in there. You know, it shields the public from the daily activities there. But if you're gonna invest in a 6-foot opaque fence, or any kind of fence for that matter, you know, to still require such a significant amount of landscaping, I'm not comfortable with that. It seems like we could significantly cut that down by just requiring a lawn area or something like that. You know, an area for a walkway, but I don't know. I'm uncomfortable with that particular, you know, item E on 412 there. So on line 464 on page 19, it talks about these columnar Swedish aspen trees may not be used, you know, to meet the requirement of a parking row termination.
AKA landscape island.
Right.
Because the purpose of, from a planning standpoint, and a landscaping standpoint, and an aesthetic standpoint, the landscape islands are there to have that vegetation and to put a tree canopy back, the shade, the shelter, and that visual thing. The columnar aspens are great along a building or if you're in a tight space, but the goal of having trees in your landscape island is to have a fuller tree. Now, we don't necessarily have the best trees in Alaska to provide shade, but there are still some that do, and depending on how you orient your parking, if your landscape island's in the right spot, it'll give shade. But they don't give that visual impact that's typically desired of a landscape island. It's just it's an aesthetic thing at that point.
What's the cost difference between something more shade oriented at some point, you know, 10 years down the road after it's planted versus one of these columnar?
I don't know the answer, but I haven't heard that come up as a concern of eliminating them necessarily. Nobody's really said, oh, but I really want, and in fact, if you look in the city today, they don't have them, but they may be the cheaper tree. I just haven't priced them out, but they don't accomplish the purpose, that visual attractiveness purpose of having the trees in the landscape island.
I think there are some developments currently using those trees which would just...
They do use them at their perimeter.
Yeah.
I think the Ford dealership has them in their perimeter, so they're good.
As well as some others did as well. And one of the things they mentioned to me was the cost of landscaping in Alaska, particularly when you get to trees, is not inexpensive. So, then the last thing, you can all clap now. The last thing I have is on page 34 of 44, Exhibit C. Which,
I lost you. I lost you.
on page 113 of 213 of the packet, which is page 34 of the resolution.
That's in the Planning Commission resolution, so let me go find that for you.
That's
in
the
the council.
attachment.
Oh, that was an attachment, okay. Never mind then, because that's not something that we'll be dealing with. Well, I thank you for indulging me in this here. I am a little bit uncomfortable with a couple of things, and I'm also concerned. And I'll bring this up later when we talk about the special committee going forward. You know, I served on one of those committees when you were a newer planner for us here, and none of our recommendations were taken forward after 3 months of work, but that's...
Sorry to interrupt.
That's okay.
This is within the ordinance. Is that the same?
Yeah, it is. So if we look at line 597 on page 28, you said?
Or 68 of the packet?
Okay.
Can you leave that there for
Yeah.
just a second? So we can make sure everybody finds what they're looking at. So we're looking at, of the ordinance, line 597. And this is on page 28 of 39 of the resolution, which is page 68 of the packet. What concerns me is this is an industrial zoned piece of property. No, it's residential zoned in the back. So this is an industrial zone piece of property that abuts a residential zone piece of property. And we have the outdoor storage has to be 50 feet from the lot line, and the lot line has that 6-foot high fencing on it. My goodness, that's a tremendous amount of property that has all of a sudden become unusable.
So in this particular drawing, the 50 is not the part that matters. What they're showing is if there's the residential property or zoning to the north, and with residential across the street, you're going to have to put a visual screening between them.
Right.
The 50 is just, it was in the diagram that we have. We can get that whited out.
Is that a requirement?
There are requirements in the code. It's not part of the landscaping code, but there are requirements for setbacks for industrially zoned lots that are larger.
If it is a 50-foot requirement, I would recommend that committee take that take that up and look, because that's a tremendous amount of property that becomes unusable.
It's only if you're abutting residential.
Right. It's still a tremendous amount of property that becomes unusable.
I believe it allows accessory storage. I probably won't be able to get my hands on it fast enough.
That's okay. It's not something we're dealing with tonight, but I
Correct.
appreciate that.
It's in the setback section.
And thank you, Madam Clerk, for that. I agree that our landscape code as it exists is pretty egregious when it comes to industrial, particularly in the area that you were talking about. I mean, I've been back there many times and listened to many people for quite some time grind on my ear about what a wonderful planning ability that we have here in the city. But I don't think all the fixes are here, but I do think this is a Band-Aid, and I would think that if we move forward with establishing the committee later on, that there should be some time set in the future to rip off that Band-Aid and to come up with a complete fix. But even though I'm not entirely happy with this, I go to most of the planning commission meetings. I understand the frustration that they have and the frustration that the public has, but I will support this. Thank you, Madam Planner and Madam Mayor.
Is there any further discussion?
Madam Mayor?
Yes. Colleen.
Yes, ma'am. I've got just a few questions, if I could. Just looking at the ordinance, there's, for example, line 57 through 60 on page 2, and it talks about landscape vegetation that are existing, and then it also talks about trees that are preserved, that are existing, healthy trees identified in landscape plans. It has come to my attention that the state is looking at removing invasive trees. For example, Mayday or chokecherry trees are now considered invasive. And with that, is the Planning Commission looking at that, or this new subcommittee considering some of the rules that are coming down from the state with regard to invasive vegetation or trees that either may be existing or considered for planting for some of these areas?
Through the mayor to Councilmember Sullivan Leonard, I know the Planning Commission did not speak about that specifically. Interestingly enough, the one change that came out of the input we received is add back cottonwoods, which we had left them out. We had removed them in 2017 because they are invasive and create a lot of issues. But what was brought forward by the landscape architects is in some places, for example, wetlands, they are actually a good tree to have. Now, I'm not an expert when it comes to wetland trees, but so the commission added it back in. I would think it's certainly something that the task force, if it's set up, could look at, or if Staff could look into it too. I mean, either way, but they did not look at that. And I was not personally aware of them coming up with a list. I believe, I probably can't find you the citation exactly. I believe there's something in here that talks about not having invasive species. There's probably something generic in there. But as far as calling them out, that's something we'd have to work on in the future.
That sounds great. I know cottonwood trees are just a true headache for a lot of my neighbors that have them, you know, with the cotton that floats all over and plants new trees everywhere that are kind of bothersome. The Mayday trees are interesting. They're a pretty tree. They're ornamental. But DNR has defined them as problem trees as well, mainly because of the birds that eat the berries that are fermented in fall and early winter, and apparently that causes problems. But anyway, I just want to bring it to light with the sense that we are looking at this now. And I know in the past when we had set forward these standards for landscaping, some of the challenges we had after, I'll just give you an example, when Fred Meyer built out their parking lot, we had little areas where they had trees and vegetation and shrubs. And you drive back through there, nobody's watering the trees, nobody's watering the flowers, and it just looked horrible. So, you know, my hopes are that the standards are there for landscaping, but not too onerous, but certainly pride in ownership with our businesses and industrial areas hopefully will allow it to look good still and functional. So, okay, thank you.
Is there further discussion?
Simon Brown.
Has left.
Madam Mayor.
Yes, Mr. Graham.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Madam Mayor, I propose amendment number 1 to this resolution on line 345, following the word city, to add the word planner, so that we may not be released or canceled without approval from the city planner.
Simon Brown.
Has joined.
Is there a second?
Second.
Is there discussion?
Madam Mayor, I mentioned earlier that I'm just uncomfortable with the word city there. I have attended planning commission meetings, you know, for many years as an observer, and you have, of course, sat there as an active participant and a chair, so you know people come in all the time and said, well, you know, the mayor told me I could do this, or, you know, Councilman Graham said this was a good idea, or, you know, the unnamed code compliance officer said, yeah, that should be all right. So I think we need to define where that approval needs to come from. In this case, you know, I agree with the attorney. It is a legal thing there that bounces through many things, but the city planner is certainly going to be aware of his or her limitations on that. So I think defining that as opposed to saying from the city, which is a very ambiguous term, would be appropriate. Thank you.
Is there further discussion?
Just to add, and I apologize, I know I normally don't jump in. What if we didn't have what if the position of city planner wasn't filled? Would the maker of the amendment would be amenable to perhaps the mayor or the mayor's designee?
That would be perfect with me if that's all right with the second.
Yes.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Madam Mayor?
Yes, Colleen.
Regarding further discussion on this, maybe it would be easier to have it say city planner or designee.
Clerk is shaking her head.
Only because...
In affirmative or negative?
Negative. No, I'm sorry. I don't mean to overstep here. I just know, and from past, there are times we've, not that Miss Crawford's going anywhere, she's amazing, but the city has been without a city planner.
Mm-hmm.
And the mayor appoints them. So just.
Well, maybe that's why just the term city is applicable here then, because if we don't have a city planner, who would be the one making certain decisions? Would it be Public Works Director or whom?
Holly, you want to weigh in?
Well, I'll just reiterate. I think that's one of the reasons when you have something like this for having the term city is because of this sort of change, but also given the nature of what's occurring for approval. The way that we often address this, there's forms, there's a process that you need to go through and just make sure the procedures and policies about how do I go through this and I walk in and what office am I walking into? The city has regulatory control over that. And so you need it to reflect who's here and, what roles they're fulfilling in that way. So, I prefer the word city here. I can see why it's there, but I do think that sometimes you can have a uniform change throughout a code to go to city planner, for example, then your definition provides that flexibility and then you have consistency in your language. So I think it's very appropriate. If I had my wish list on this as an attorney, it would be keep it as it is, but take the comments which are very astute and actually very useful for a more holistic rewrite for the task force and say, look at who's doing these things and under what conditions, so that you are addressing that.
Madam Mayor, if I might comment, I understand your use of the word city. From a procedural respect, that becomes ambiguous because at this particular point it could be defined as either the mayor, the city council, or who. So it doesn't really tell you the structure of who has the authority or at what level the authority must be regulated or aimed at. So if you put in a person or then you add your structure into it, you then understand what the term city would mean. At the current time, city could mean the chief of police. They speak for the city. Or it could mean the mayor or whatever. So I think it really should be directed from a procedural standpoint and address what procedure that we want, what authority is given to that particular person to administer that particular line item.
Madam Mayor, to follow up on both the attorney's comments, number one, I appreciate the fact that it should be consistent throughout, which it is not at this point. But to follow up on Mr. Johnson's comment there, if somebody's going to come in and invest, $100,000 or $100 million in our city, it should be clear in the regulations where they need to go, who has the authority to do what, so they don't spend time tap dancing around, going to Crystal's office, and then going to Public Works office, and then going to the mayor's office, and then finally ending up in whatever office they need to be in to make things happen. I think the regulation should be clear and direct that, since we're trying to attract major investors to the city, and they're not going to be familiar with the local procedures and things like that. So the ordinances should be there to help them understand what our requirements are, not to be ambiguous. Thank you.
In our, I just lost it. Right there. Okay, a city planner means the city planner for the planning department of the city of Wasilla or designee.
So maybe city planner would work. We don't have the position filled. She presumably appoint someone.
Yeah, city planner would work.
So the amendment currently reads what?
To add planner.
City planner.
Thank you.
Madam Mayor?
Yes.
I personally like how it reads now because I think when you start pinpointing who and where exactly, like the city clerk mentioned, we might not have a city planner, or, back in my MTA days, you can leave things open. It's not like someone's going to come in and go, oh, I don't know, that's not my job. Well, if it's not designated, or they might say, no, this says I need to see a certain person. I like the way it reads. I think it leaves it open for, discussion with other departments, other whatever. I would not vote yes on that amendment.
Okay. Any further discussion? Hearing none. We are voting on the amendment only. Madam Clerk.
Councilmember Sullivan Leonard?
No.
Councilmember Graham?
Yes.
Councilmember Johnson?
Yes.
Councilmember Brown?
No.
Councilmember Velock?
No.
Councilmember Harvey?
Yes.
The motion fails, or the amendment fails, with Councilmembers Graham, Johnson, and Harvey in support. Councilmember Sullivan, Leonard, Brown, and Velock opposed. Madam Mayor, do you wish to exercise your right to vote?
No.
Okay. So for us then, if there's no further discussion, is a vote on the motion to adopt ordinance serial number 2203.
Is there further discussion on 2203? Hearing none, Madam Clerk.
Thank you. Councilmember Graham?
Yes.
Councilmember Johnson?
Yes.
Councilmember Brown?
Yes.
Councilmember Velock?
Yes.
Councilmember Harvey?
Yes.
Councilmember Sullivan Leonard?
Yes.
The motion to adopt ordinance serial number 2203 passes unanimously with Councilmember Sullivan Leonard, Graham, Johnson, Brown, Velock, and Harvey in support.
Thank you. Madam Clerk, please read the title of the second public hearing.
Thank you. That's ordinance serial number 2204, amending the fiscal year 2022 budget by accepting and appropriating $7,400 from Museums Alaska, ARPA federal funding for a summer intern for the Wasilla Museum Photo Exhibit Project.
The public hearing on ordinance serial number 2204 is open. Anyone who would like to testify, please come forward and begin by stating your first and last name. Comments are limited to 3 minutes per person. Hearing no one, the public hearing is closed. Is there a motion to adopt ordinance serial number 2204?
Madam Mayor?
Yes.
I move to approve ordinance 2204.
Is there a
Councilman
second?
Brown, second.
Is there discussion?
Madam Mayor, if I could just get a clarification of the term ARPA, if we could spell that out someplace.
Mr. Tankersley. American Recovery.
Recovery and Settlement Act. For crying out loud. I say this every day. Why is the name?
American Rescue Plan Act. American Rescue Plan Act.
So this is federal funding passed through the state.
Yep.
Yes.
Sorry, didn't mean to wake everybody up.
Okay. Is there any further discussion? Hearing none. Madam Clerk, please take a roll call vote on the adoption of ordinance serial number 2204.
Thank you. Councilmember Johnson?
Yes.
Councilmember Brown?
Yes.
Councilmember Velock?
Yes.
Councilmember Harvey?
Yes.
Councilmember Sullivan Leonard?
Yes.
And Councilmember Graham.
Yes.
Motion to adopt ordinance serial number 2204 passes unanimously with Councilmember Sullivan Leonard, Graham, Johnson, Brown, Velock, and Harvey in support.
Madam Clerk, please read the title of the third and final public hearing.
That's amending the fiscal year 2022 budget by appropriating $100,000 from the water fund balance for the Spruce Alternative Well.
The public hearing on ordinance serial number 22-05 is open. Anyone who would like to testify, please come forward and begin by stating your first and last name. Comments are limited to 3 minutes per person. Seeing no one, the public hearing is closed. Is there a motion to adopt ordinance serial number 22-05?
Madam Mayor, I move that we adopt ordinance serial number 22-05.
Is there a second?
Second.
It's been moved by Councilmember Velock and seconded by Councilmember Harvey to adopt ordinance serial number 22-05. Is there discussion?
Madam Mayor, just a point of clarification. I believe if Mr. Tinkersley would address this, I believe the $100,000 was actually an anticipated budgeted expense within the existing water fund project. Is that not correct?
I guess I need to understand your question a little more. I mean, we're appropriating $100,000 for this project.
Correct. We anticipated this need in the existing budget. We're just taking the monies out of the budget to fulfill this particular need.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. That's what I just needed to clarify.
Is there more discussion? Hearing none, Madam Clerk, please take a roll call vote on adoption ordinance serial number 22-05.
Thank you. Councilmember Brown?
Yes.
Councilmember Velock?
Yes.
Councilmember Harvey?
Yes.
Councilmember Sullivan Leonard?
Yes.
Councilmember Graham?
Yes.
And Councilmember Johnson.
Yes.
The motion to adopt ordinance serial number 2205 passes unanimously with Councilmember Sullivan Leonard, Johnson, Brown, Velock, and Harvey in support.
Okay, we are now at persons to be heard. The first one signed up is Justin Coles.
Madam Mayor, Council. My name is Justin Coles. I live at 683 West Nelson in Wasilla. I've been here before to talk about the speeding problem on Nelson. What I heard last time is that you were going to take it into advisement as to different ways of controlling the speed, but that speed bumps were taken off the agenda. What I'd like to be here is to ask you to put that back in, and specifically I'd call your attention to the location of Nelson at Weber. The intersection is controlled by a stop sign. So far, since I've lived there, I've seen a half a dozen accidents at that intersection. One of the speed being one of the factors of each one of those accidents. At that location, if you look towards the west, there's a large hill, and if the vehicles going eastbound come down that hill and they don't put on the brakes, their inertia from the top of the hill, thinking that they're doing 25 miles an hour, the inertia will cause the vehicle to go in excess of maybe 50 miles an hour by the time they reach the intersection. And there's no way of controlling that traffic. A police officer couldn't control that speed. Now, if the intersection, right across from the intersection, is the two condominium complexes that have been there since 1981. The sidewalks or the driveways from out of those condos come out, and they're perpendicular to the street at that location. Now, of those condos, there's 12 units. There are 9 that are owned by people over 65. Now, I'm over 65, but I can come out and I have better dexterity than the majority of the people. But if I come out and I look up to the top of that hill and I see those vehicles, I estimate that I could get out on the road before they come down. But as I'm finding out, I can't. And if I look down the other way and try to find out those vehicles, and I estimate their speed, I should be able to pull out onto the roadway. I can't, because the cars get there too fast. If you had a speed bump where the vehicles come down that street, excuse me. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Stearns.
Thank you. One of these to each of the members.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Tom.
Thanks.
We're not asking for any money. Good evening. My name is Tom Stearns. I'm the Senior Ambassador for the Wasilla Area Seniors Incorporated. The biggest news of our month has been, well, actually our year, is that WASI was voted the nonprofit of the year by the Greater Wasilla Area Chamber of Commerce. That is because of our great leadership, because of our great staff, and because of the great volunteers that we have that give all the time that they give freely to our organization. And so we thank them. The Willow House, 75% full, 6 vacancies left. If you're a candidate and you want a place to live, you better do that quickly. In front of you is our newest event. It's called Paint Your Heart. Saturday, February 19th from 10 to 1. Have fun painting with your friends and learn about heart health. Cost to participate is $25. Includes all your paint and supplies, snacks, and limited spaces available. And the contact stuff is all there. It's Heart Month, and so they're doing this event. And then our Miles for Meals. Although we don't have an event, what we did have was meals. And as you're aware, we had a windstorm, and our people were out there, not Monday. Monday we were closed, but Tuesday, the second day, work day, our people were out there delivering meals and doing welfare checks of people. And that was a very big deal at that point. And it was amazing that they were able to get out there and get into these different places. And then our nutrition services, our nutrition services program has begun to realize improvements in efficiency. They saved $7,700, and they've gotten 15% better out of the things that they're doing there in our nutrition program. Also, we have, since I have a couple of minutes left or seconds left, we have 2 board vacancies. So if you're interested in serving on another board, you can apply for that. And I think that's it. Thank you. Any questions?
No, but I have a statement, Mr. Stearns. Would you please tell the people that do the delivering the meals that the city appreciates them during this windstorm checking on the elderly, because the emergency, we didn't have a list or whatever, and that provided a list to help us find out if our seniors, how they were doing in this windstorm. So tell them that the city appreciates it, and thank you very much.
Okay.
For Mr. Stearns, for the seniors that you serve, delivering mails, do your delivery vehicles have the COVID-19 home test kits in them for persons that may want those that you're actually seeing, because they're not typically getting out in the community very much?
That's a good question. I do not know. We have them over at Wasilla, and people are using them, and they're very glad to have them. And so, but the answer to that question, I'm not sure. It seems like it would be a good idea, though.
I'm sure, to use the attorney's word, I'm sure the city would coordinate with you to make those available if you would like to have them available for the Meals on Wheels folks.
Mr. Graham, the city.
I think it should be the city planner.
The city has already been to Wasilla and discussed with them if they need them and whatever. So
we appreciate the city's help in that and getting those to us. So thank you very much.
Yes, sir.
Anything else? Thank you very much.
Is there anyone else who would like to address the council at this time? Hearing none, then we are going to take a 10-minute at ease. At 8:31, and Council Member Harvey, would you come forward, please? Go that way. I'm following you.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you for your service to the city and to the community of Wasilla. Wish you well in your next adventure. And if you get that orange grove, remember every one of us.
Madam Mayor?
Absolutely.
Councilperson Graham, I'd like to move item 8.3.2 out of the consent agenda into new business, please.
Two. It goes to new business.
Councilmember Graham, that's resolution serial number 2204, correct?
Yes, ma'am. Resolution serial number 2204, establishing a Wasilla Landscape Standards Review Committee and prescribing its duties.
Madam Clerk, please read the items for approval under the consent agenda.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. We have no introductions. We have two sets of meeting minutes, special meeting minutes of January 10th, 2022, and the regular meeting minutes of January 10th, 2022. We now have one resolution for approval. That is resolution serial number 2204, establishing a Wasilla Landscape Design, establishing a Wasilla Landscape Standards Review Committee and prescribing its duties. Thank you. Is that the one you... That's the one you just pulled?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. For some reason, I was in my head, I was just sure you were going to pull state legislative priorities. So anyway, I apologize.
So I can pull that one as well, just for
No, in my head. So let's rewind here. Our resolution for approval under the consent is resolution serial number 2202, confirming state legislative priorities for fiscal year 2023, and then the resolution 2204 we're going to talk about under new business.
Right. Right. Is there a motion to approve the consent agenda as read?
So moved by Councilman Johnson.
Is there a second?
Second.
It's been moved by Councilmember Johnson and seconded by Councilmember Harvey to approve the consent agenda as read. Is there objection to the motion? Hearing none, the motion is approved. We are now to unfinished business. Madam Clerk, please read the title of the IM.
Thank you. That's IM number 2114, Draft Code of Ethics Review and Discussion. This has been continued from November 8th and 22nd, as well as the December 13th City Council meetings, and we'll go through this in the Committee of the Whole, led by our City Attorney, Holly Wells.
Is there a motion to enter the Committee of the Whole?
I'm Councilmember Beelock. I move that we enter into the Committee of the Whole.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, we are now in, it's been moved by Councilmember Velock and seconded by Councilmember Graham to enter Committee of the Whole. Is there objection? Hearing none, we are now in the Committee of the Whole. The time is 8:35. City Attorney.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'm just going to run through some questions that we posed and worked together regarding last meeting, or actually the meeting before last. So I want you to see the questions. I'm going to throw out about 3 what I would call points of homework that I'm hoping all the council members can think about. And we are hoping at some point to have a meeting that is a little bit more dedicated to this issue, whether it's a special meeting or whether it's a period on an agenda where there's a light agenda, so that we can not only look at the questions I'm going to be working with you now, but we can delve back into the code. But this is just to keep it very simple and very direct, so we can focus your attention on some areas that you as a council have recognized as problematic areas. So the first question the council really delved into was, what is immediate family? The definition currently is based on a few jurisdictions that have uncle and aunt in their definition. The Matsu borough's definition has several others, but not aunt and uncle. They include grandchildren and children's or spouses' children and spouses of children, and they refer to a regular household member. So every community, there's a lot of differences in how that's defined, but currently I have uncle and aunt removed in the definition that's in the code as a potential. So it's just something to think about. What is immediate family to you? This is important in a code of ethics because it's going to go to what constitutes conflict of interest, how that's going to arise, and really finding that balance between flexibility that allows people to run for council and also participate in your community, but also, making sure that the public trust is preserved. So think about it. That's number one. What is immediate family? And so that will be something.
So on that topic, Madam Attorney, is there a reason we can't use the definition that we use now, which pretty much is determined by APOC, that says, you need to report financial activities of your spouse and children?
You can use spouse and children, and you can use grandchildren, and so I think that the definition, you can just mirror APOC. You can definitely do that. So there's no reason that you can't do that. I mean, really, you could put anything you want in there. I think that one of the things you always have to remember is if the court finds you have a conflict, they don't really care that much about your code. So that's always the scary part. So they'll care a little bit, but if they think there's a due process violation under the Constitution, or they think that it's a conflict of interest under common law, we can't protect ourselves using our code. We can protect the city from certain damages, but it's a problem. So that's why it's always best to define it in a way that makes sense to you. But I think the APOC definition, I think it's fine. I think that works. So we can take that one. The next decision is substantial financial interest. One of the things we really want you to start just really thinking about is, where is that line when we're looking at a rebuttable presumption? How much money? We have $5,000 in your code right now for being a substantial financial interest, and that's with the balancing test. The Matsu Borough has $1,000. It's different for the legislature, it's much less, and we exempt certain things such as meals and basic gifts. So just thinking about, where's that line, what makes me, or what could make me, or what a reasonable reasonable person expect me to change my conduct in order to secure, $1,000, $5,000 a gift. So that's what you're really thinking about. That's what we want to do when we look at that definition. So again, we have 5,000. That's on the higher end, but you're doing your code in 2022, right? And so most of these numbers were set in earlier years, and so you see that go up. That's completely acceptable. So just something to ponder. Yes.
No, I was just scratching my head.
Oh, okay. Let's see. So I'm going to skip advisory opinions. I think that we spent a lot of time talking about that and what that looked like, but there wasn't a lot of challenges or conflicts to getting an advisory opinion. I think it's just more defining the scope. And do we want to allow, currently the code is drafted in a way to allow a council member or any official to ask for an opinion and for that to shield them from any action if they act in compliance with that opinion. And so not every code has that. I am a fan of that in the codes I draft only because it's a big obligation and responsibility when you take a seat on council or especially when you take an appointment, right, on a commission, and having a way to be able to say, well, I'm not really sure what the answer is, but I'm going to try to get the answer, and then being able to lean on that. I think that's a great asset to provide. The other question one of the other questions we looked at was disclosure of complaint. We had prohibited it in your code. It's prohibited in the Matsu Borough Code. Truth be told, I'm not aware of one that does not prohibit it. Code of ethics almost always require this level of confidentiality because of the risk to the officials if allegations are disclosed to the public before they are validated or verified on, and so that's why they're there, but you certainly don't have to keep them there. So keep that in mind. There was just debate, confidential, not confidential. On the sanctions, civil penalties, and remedies, one of the remedies here, so since you have a hearing officer, there was some talk about reducing the violations or the penalties just as it went to appointees, and whether or not a hearing officer could find a violation, and that finding of a violation could result in removal of an appointee. So that was a question of concern. So think about what kind of penalties make sense. Does this go too far? Does it allow too much? Do you want to keep it very simple, a monetary penalty or sanctions verbally? Or do you want to allow for more when you have something regarding travel or other privileges? This allows you to put restrictions on those, but maybe that's too much. Maybe you want to start off with less. And I will tell you, they run the gamut. You're not going to be able to remove an elected official under your code of ethics without a more restricted, a process that requires a finding of a violation of the statute or a crime of moral turpitude, that you follow Title 29's requirements and go through that step. I didn't see any desire to go to quite that extent, and it's certainly not written like that now. So, but it's something to think about. It doesn't mean it can't be done. It's certainly been done in other communities. The limitation period, we have here a very generous limitation period, which I really got the impression on the last one that this is just a little too generous to be comfortable. And I think the majority of what I was hearing was more like a year. Some people said 6 months. I think a year is more common, but that's also because you discover something that's, when you discover a violation, discovering that and then filing a complaint within a year from service is common. That's what I did do some checking around, and so Matsu Borough does a year. A lot of the communities on the peninsula do 5, and you can, this is a code of ethics, it's not required. This is a standard you're holding yourself to, so you can reduce it. And near the borough and see how that goes. Or go even, you can make it so that you can only bring a complaint while somebody's in service. And then that could leave open if the discovery period, if they're in service for 15 years, so you might want to put but it could also, you have official would have the ability to simply resign or stop doing their position if they wanted to avoid a violation. And maybe that's good and maybe that's bad, but that's for council and to decide. I think those were my big, I want you to think about these questions. Let me just make sure I'm not missing any. And that's, I'm done. Doesn't anybody have any questions?
Okay.
Madam Mayor,
Yes.
Madam Attorney, could we get copies of those slides sent to the clerk and then?
We have, yeah, I'll get them to you.
Okay. Is there a motion and a second to exit the committee of the whole?
So moved by Councilman Johnson.
Is there a second?
Second.
Motion has been made by Johnson and seconded by Velock. Is there any objection to the motion? Hearing none, we are out of the committee of the whole. Is there any direction or action the council would like to take? Hearing none. We're now at new business. Madam Clerk, please read the title of the first item.
Thank you. That's an update from administration on emergency response efforts related to COVID-19.
I have not taken any new measures in response to COVID-19. We are still currently working on it and waiting for CDC and OSHA. Madam Clerk, please.
Madam Mayor?
Yes.
Could we get an update on how the distribution of the home test kits is going?
Troy.
Well, by all accounts, home test kits are a success. I would say out of what is it, 224 cases. 72. 272. Anyway, yeah. Anyway. 65.
272 cases was the initial order. 164 cases have been distributed. On hand, the city has 43 cases, and we are holding 65 cases for the Matsu Health Foundation. So a total of 108 cases on hand.
Just to add to that, location like the library, for example, they are consuming in excess of a case and a half a day. So kudos to them out there. And Matsu Health has been right at the forefront with many of the providers out there directing them to the Matsu Health. So.
Thank you, sir.
Okay. Any further discussion on the at-home test kits? Madam Clerk, please read the title of the next item under new business.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. That's AM number 2203, accepting the resignation of James E. Harvey from the City Council, Seat F, declaring Seat F vacant and approving the appointment process to fill the vacancy until a successor is elected at the October 4th, 2022 regular election.
Is there a motion to adopt AM number 22-03?
So moved.
Second.
It's been moved by Councilmember Harvey and seconded by Councilmember Graham to adopt AM number 22-03. Is there discussion? Hearing none, Madam Clerk, take a roll call vote on the adoption of AM number 22-03.
Councilmember Harvey.
Yes.
Councilmember Sullivan Leonard.
Yes.
Councilmember Graham?
Yes.
Councilmember Johnson?
Yes.
Councilmember Brown?
Yes.
Councilmember Vila?
Yes.
The motion to approve AM number 2203 passes unanimously with Councilmember Sullivan, Leonard, Graham, Johnson, Brown, Vila, and Harvey in support.
Okay. Madam Clerk, please read the next item under new business.
Thank you. That's resolution serial number 2204, establishing a Wasilla Landscape Standards Review Committee and prescribing its duties.
Do I hear a motion to approve resolution -22-04?
Madam Mayor, I move resolution serial number 22-04.
Is there a second?
Councilman Brown, second.
It's been made by Councilmember Graham and seconded by Councilmember Brown to approve resolution serial number 22-04. Is there discussion?
Madam Mayor.
Mr. Graham.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and thank you, Mr. Brown, for the second. My concern here with this is that we're setting up this Wasilla Landscape Standards Review Committee, but we really don't have any action expected of them. It says we're going to set it up for a term of not to exceed 6 months. You know, completion of the special purpose, and the purpose, of course, is to review the landscape, particularly the industrial landscape code there. Having served on one of these committees many years ago, and spent a tremendous amount of time and effort and energy along with 10 other persons from the community, only to have our findings never presented to the council, is kind of quite distressing, and is definitely doesn't encourage people to volunteer for this sort of thing. Of course, they're going to set their own schedule and figure out how many meetings they need, and with great advice from the city planner and from the planning commission. But I would think if we're going to have this commission, we should have some sort of report due to us from the commission. Or what are they calling this again? Commission, I'm sorry.
Committee?
Standards Review Committee, some sort of report to us from the committee at the termination of their, you know, whenever they term out, or when they get to a certain point. And I think the presentation needs to come from the committee, not from staff, so that we can actually have a committee of the whole type discussion with the committee to find out, is the city actually meeting what it is that their concerns are? Because this is a fairly wide-ranging committee. You've got designers on there, you've got a couple of citizen at-large things, you have developers on there. This is going to be a big committee, and there's going to be some lively discussion, and not everybody's going to be happy with what happens. But I think the city council should commit to hearing from the committee at some point, you know, as they near the end of their process. Also, I noticed in here, and as is usual, there is no compensation for persons serving on this committee, and I think that's appropriate, but I do think there should be some money budgeted through planning so that they can have sandwiches and sodas and coffee or whatever at their meetings there, and those would be my concerns. I don't think it takes a change to the resolution. What was this called again? Yeah, this was the resolution. I don't think it takes a change to the resolution to do that. I think just direction from the council and the administration would make that happen, because these folks are going to be, you know, committing a tremendous amount of time and brain power and helping move the city forward. And I think we should certainly show that we appreciate them. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Is there further discussion?
Madam Mayor, Councilman Brown.
Yes, Councilmember Brown.
I guess I'm a little confused. Is the committee being asked for by the planning commission who's going to submit a report to us? Are we going to get two reports, one from the committee and one from the planning commission after they receive the recommendations back?
It's my understanding that the planning commission would come forward with a new regulation or the new ordinance based in part on what the commission has to say. Would that be true? But we wouldn't, under normal circumstances, we would not hear from the committee. We would only see the request for changes to the ordinance. Is that correct?
For the record, Tina Crawford, City Planner, through the Mayor to Councilmember Graham. You are correct. The way that the code is set up is any amendments to Title 16 go to the Planning Commission for public hearing and review. Then they forward a recommendation to the City Council. So that's a requirement in the code that it goes through that process. Hence, that's why this is set up that way, to make the recommendations. Because theoretically, the Commission could review the recommendations and say, 5 out of the 10 don't make sense. They're not consistent with the vision, the comprehensive plan. We're not willing to move those forward. The other 5 we think have merit. We'll move those forward in our recommendation. Now, what staff typically does, and it can certainly be added to this, say for instance that happens, we could include the group's recommendation, but you're going to have the planning commission, meaning their documentation, what their final recommendations are. But I believe, a lot of weight's supposed to be given to your planning commission for their review and their input when it comes forward to the council. So they should have vetted out those recommendations, should have some strong recommendations for you and the reason why. But we can certainly include all of the recommendations that come out of that committee. And
Madam Mayor, that's my concern. If they give us a report and we have to say so on that report, and at the same time the planning commission is writing the new regs, I'm just concerned that it could get convoluted, but two different directions.
I understand that concern and I understand the process, but I think these folks want to know that we're listening. The Planning Commission certainly is going to carry much more weight than this committee does, but the committee needs to be heard.
Is there further discussion?
Madam Chair, Mayor, I'm at the Planning Commission, I'm sorry, I've shifted gears. I will just point out, and I don't think that it speaks negatively to their request to be heard, but the city is not asking for them to be on the task force. They approached the Planning Commission and said, create a task force and let us participate. That was after the 2017 update and then numerous outreach during the 2021. So they may have some things of value to add, and I'm sure that they will, but this isn't the city requesting their service, it's them volunteering their service, hence the shorter timeline. And the Planning Commission wanted to have the ability to see what they came up with, because the Planning Commission was not that upset. I mean, they were willing to entertain it, but they weren't committed that there were hundreds of changes that still need to be made.
And I appreciate that comment, but like any volunteer effort from the city does need to go out and recruit the right people to sit in those seats. Certainly, it would be great if the right people came forward and volunteered, but that typically hasn't been our history. Our history in the past has been, we've got some great people, but there are some other people that we need or we would like to see participate in that. So yes, you are correct. It is purely a volunteer effort, and most of them are there by coming forward to the mayor or to you to be on that committee, but many will have been approached or have heard about it through other means and then decide from there.
Is there further discussion?
Madam Mayor, Councilman Johnson.
Yes, sir.
Over the past year, we have heard numerous discussions in front of this particular board on other issues with respect to the Planning Commission. primarily lack of standards, lack of, say for road construction, lack of real go-forward things within the planning that we just don't see happening. And we hear an awful lot of talk about landscaping and these kind of items. And I was just wondering if maybe this is could be expanded to do other things as well, rather than just limited to landscaping. Thank you.
Mr. Johnson, we are just taking one little bite of the apple at a time. So this committee will just do landscaping, and actually it will be a, let's see how this does. And we can always appoint another committee for different things.
Granted, Madam Mayor, I just wanted to bring up my continuing thing on lack of standards and to make sure that this continues to come up before the council. Okay, rather than just keeping the discussions going on like why are the roads not designed to a specific standard or whatever, or where is our ultimate plans for sidewalks, gutters, and sewers, things like that, which the Planning Commission I think should be responsible for as well. And I've had some discussions with a couple of the projects in front of the Planning Commission that went absolutely nowhere. So it's a little bit of a frustration of mine. Thank you.
The roads, Danielle, do you want to speak to that, please?
Danielle Bischoff, Director of Public Works, and I would just say that planning falls under Public Works for roads and sewer utilities, sidewalks. We do coordination with the state, and I'm aware that we have some outdated code regarding different standards, and it's something that I would like to look at and address moving forward. I'm still getting myself all up to speed on everything, but it is something that we are aware of and would like to be in line with the borough and in line with DOT in the appropriate manner.
Any further discussion? Hearing none. Madam Clerk, please take a roll call vote.
Thank you. This is on the adoption of a resolution serial number 2204. Councilmember Sullivan Leonard?
Yes.
Councilmember Graham?
Yes.
Councilmember Johnson?
Yes.
Councilmember Brown?
Yes.
Councilmember Vlock?
Yes.
And Councilmember Harvey.
Yes.
The motion to approve resolution serial number 2204 passes unanimously with Councilmembers Sullivan, Leonard, Graham, Johnson, Brown, Vlock, and Harvey in support.
We are now at communications. Madam Clerk, please read the title of the IM and meeting minutes.
Thank you. IM number 2201, monthly financial reports for the period ending December 31st, 2021 to include the month-to-date expenditure report, disbursements greater than $10,000, investment report, and quarterly report of businesses receiving a penalty waiver for sales tax, and Parks and Rec Commission meeting minutes, January 12th, 2022.
We are now at audience comment. Is there anyone present who would like to address the City Council at this time? Seeing no one, then we will move on. And Madam Clerk, your comments, please.
Thank you. So next regular meeting, February 14th, and then after that, we have the special meeting, February 22nd, and that's where I'll present the Clerk's Office Records Management and City Council budgets to the Council for discussion. And then rounding out February, we have the February 28th meeting. AML Winter Legislative Conference, we have all members attending, except for Councilmember Harvey, because obviously he has resigned from the council. And then Councilmember Johnson, I don't believe you're attending. All other members, we're in the process of getting per diem checks and other travel arrangements made, and we'll be in contact with all of you as to when you can pick those up. Annual POFD statements, public official financial disclosure statements, of course, those are due by March 15th. And also one last thing to note, in March, we only have one regular City Council meeting, and that will be held on the 14th. So that's all I have, Madam Mayor. Thank you.
Madam Attorney.
No comment.
Councilmember Graham.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Certainly appreciate everybody's participation tonight. One last thing for participation for Mr. Tankersley regarding IM 2201, the expenses and disbursements. If you could recap for me what amount of expenses for public safety based on the report that you sent were available or eligible for reimbursement through the CARES Act, and what amount will we actually reimburse ourselves, and did we in fact spend 100% of the CARES Act funds?
Mr. Mayor, Councilman Graham, small question. So for the month of December, the public safety reimbursable number available is $775,000. The amount available for us to reimburse ourselves is about $588,000. And the last question, yes, it is all consumed.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate that, and I applaud the council for making sure that that money was spent locally and not returned for the federal government to give to some other city deserving as they may be. My final comment tonight is for Mr. Harvey. It has indeed been a pleasure serving with you. I think I mentioned before that when you first came on the council, I thought, man, this is a bad idea. This is not going to work. But I couldn't have been more wrong, and I'm wrong a lot, so that says a lot. But it has been a real pleasure serving with you. I think, you know, a local graduate of Burchell High School, you know, then went into public service, essentially, working for the Department of Corrections. You've done that for several years. You've represented the Department of Corrections well, both, you know, as an employee and as a member of the bargaining group out there. You've done a tremendous job, provided a tremendous public service. If I were to have somebody in high school at this point, I would point them toward you and say, take a look at what James Harvey has done and see what you can do with your life. He is an outstanding role model. I appreciate everything that you've done. I wish you and Brittany the very best of luck in your venture, and hope to hear more from you. Thank you so much for your service. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Councilmember Brown.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. And to Councilman Harvey, again, thank you and congratulations and blessings with you as you move into the next phase of your life. Thank you very much.
Councilmember Sullivan Leonard.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. A good full meeting tonight, that's for sure. I did want to make a comment with regard to the housing and homeless issues that were brought forward tonight by the Beck Agnew group. I felt that the presentation was certainly general in nature and pertained to issues around the Matsu Valley, but I would have liked to have seen something that was very specific for Wasilla. How many youth are homeless? How many adults are homeless? Etc. And I'm sorry that that wasn't addressed, because within our policies and procedures for the city of Wasilla, we're not far-reaching beyond our own borders with regard to policy. And so we can't set up policy that is in relation to the whole Matsu borough, but we certainly can look at the city of Wasilla. And one of the things that Elizabeth Ripley had said was that, you know, the changes that they look for is with regard to city ordinance or city policy. And she did state that it was a problem, but then she also stated that the needle exchange program was part of the issue with regard to homeless. And I really take exception to that. There's no quantitative data that shows a needle exchange program has anything to do with homeless youth or issues with homeless in Wasilla. So anyway, maybe with further discussion we can get more quantitative data that's very pertinent to Wasilla as we look forward to how we do address the homeless issues in Wasilla. And then secondly, I do want to say thank you so much to Councilmember James Harvey for your years of dedication for the city. I do apologize for not being there this evening to wish you well in person, but I will call you in the next day or two and certainly discuss further. And I wish you all the best in your new endeavor with lots of sunshine and great state to move on to. So anyway, thank you again very much for your service, and thank you, Council.
Councilmember Vlock.
Colleen Sullivan Leonard
has left.
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, I just want to comment on James. I thoroughly enjoyed working with him, and I do wish him the best. Him and his family. He'd bring his kids sometimes, and they're so dang cute. Yeah, just good luck, and hopefully you'll be a public servant down there too, and bless them as well. Just thank you and wish you the best.
Councilmember Johnson.
Thank you, Madam Mayor and Council. James, I want to, I guess I'll quote J.R. Tolkien. I guess I know you only half as well as I should like. So thank you very much and best wishes to you in your move. Thank you.
Councilmember Harvey.
I'm actually going to stick to my regular council meeting comments and no comments this evening.
Oh, Councilmember Harvey, it has been, serving with you has been interesting. You've been a pain at times, but you've always been interesting. So I will miss your comments and trying to figure out what next move you're going to make. So having said that, I wish you all the best to you, Brittany, and the kids. I hope that this move is all that you expect it to be and want it to be. But remember one thing, we've all left Alaska and most of us have come back. So it's always home and we're always here. So you have phone numbers of everybody. So, and if you get that orange grove, you know, every Christmas we're all going to expect a box of oranges.
Yeah.
Yes. So thank you very much. And thank all of you council people for your time and effort. This has been a very long meeting, but we have made it. So with no further business at hand, I am adjourning unless objection is raised. We are adjourned at 9:11.